The radar operator's voice crackles through your headset, and you can hear the strain even through the static. Bogies, bearing 350, range 60 miles, closing fast. You're standing on the bridge of a Fletcher-class destroyer 50 miles northwest of Okinawa, and you've just been handed what might be your death sentence. It's April 16th, 1945, and you're on Radar Picket Station Number 1, the hottest, most dangerous assignment in the entire United States Navy. Around you, the organized chaos of general quarters erupts. Boots pound on steel decks. Watertight doors slam shut with resonant clangs that echo through the ship's compartments. Your heart hammers against your ribs as you race to your battle station, and you can't help but wonder, will this be the time? Will today be the day your luck runs out? The statistics are terrifying, and every sailor serving on radar picket duty knows them by heart. Out of the 101 destroyers assigned to these isolated, exposed stations around Okinawa, 10 would be sunk outright. 32 more would be damaged so severely by kamikaze attacks that they'd spend months in repair, if they could be repaired at all. That's a casualty rate approaching 40%. For the smaller landing craft assigned to support the destroyers, the numbers were even worse. But here's the thing about statistics. They don't tell you the full story. They don't tell you about the 80-minute ordeal faced by the crew of the USS Laffey when 22 kamikaze aircraft descended on a single destroyer in wave after relentless wave. They don't tell you about the walls of fire that erupted when aviation gasoline from crashed planes spread across steel decks. They don't tell you about the screams of men trapped in flooded compartments, or the smell of burning flesh and fuel oil, or the split-second decisions that meant the difference between a ship returning to port and a ship settling beneath the waves with most of her crew still aboard. Let's talk about what it really meant to face a kamikaze attack. Between October 1944 and August 1945, approximately 2,800 Japanese suicide pilots deliberately crashed their aircraft into Allied vessels. They sank 34 Navy ships and damaged 368 others. At Okinawa alone, they killed nearly 5,000 American sailors and wounded almost 5,000 more. The Battle of Okinawa would produce more Navy casualties than any other single naval engagement in American history, more than Pearl Harbor, more than Guadalcanal, more than the Battle of Midway. And the destroyers bore the brunt of it. Why? Because of what you are, what your ship represents. You're not a massive battleship with thick armor plating and dozens of 5-inch guns bristling from every surface. You're not an aircraft carrier with hundreds of fighters that can intercept incoming raids miles away from our fleet. You're a tin can. That's what destroyer crews called their ships. A 2,000-ton vessel with thin steel plating that wouldn't stop a determined rifle bullet, let alone a 2,000-pound bomb attached to a speeding aircraft. Out of those 303 destroyers attacked by kamikazes during the war, 92 were hit. 12 were sunk outright, sent to the bottom in minutes or hours after taking catastrophic damage. The Japanese knew exactly what they were doing when they targeted destroyers. These ships were positioned farthest from the main fleet, serving as an early warning system. They were isolated, exposed, and relatively lightly armed compared to the capital ships they protected. A kamikaze pilot, approaching at 300 miles per hour with his aircraft laden with explosives and fuel, could spot a destroyer from miles away. Your ship is part of that thin line of defense. You're stationed at one of 16 radar picket posts arranged in a ring around Okinawa, each one designated by a simple number. Station 1, where you are now, is the northernmost point, and therefore the closest to the Japanese home islands where the kamikaze aircraft are based. You're the first thing they see when they come hunting for American ships. You're the canary in the coal mine, the tripwire, the sacrifice that gives the main fleet precious minutes of warning. And the kamikazes are coming. They're organized into massive coordinated attacks called kikusui. floating chrysanthemums. 10 major Kikusui operations would be launched during the Battle of Okinawa, each one sending anywhere from 50 to 350 aircraft toward the American fleet. Not all of them were kamikazes. Some were conventional bombers and fighters, but enough of them carried pilots committed to crashing their planes into American ships that the distinction hardly mattered. The mathematics of survival are brutal and simple. Studies after the war determined that 19% of kamikaze attacks managed to hit a ship. Of those that hit, roughly 15% achieved enough damage to sink their target. But these numbers varied wildly depending on the type of ship and the circumstances of the attack. For destroyers on radar picket duty, the hit rates were often much higher because you couldn't maneuver as freely. You had to maintain your position at the picket station to provide radar coverage. When a kamikaze hit a destroyer, the results were catastrophic in ways that went beyond simple statistics. The impact itself could punch through your thin deck plating. The bomb the aircraft carried, often 500 to 1,000 pounds of high explosives, would detonate inside the ship, shredding compartments and killing anyone nearby. The aircraft's fuel tanks, carrying hundreds of gallons of high-octane aviation gasoline, would rupture and spread burning fuel across your decks and into your compartments. Within seconds, fires could rage out of control. Within minutes, secondary explosions from your own ammunition stores could tear your ship apart. And then there was the human element. A kamikaze didn't just bring explosives, it brought a corpse. The pilot's body, or pieces of it, would become part of the destruction, sometimes killing men simply through the violence of impact. Survivors would later describe finding body parts scattered across their decks, mixed in with wreckage and debris. This wasn't like artillery fire or torpedo attacks where the weapon arrived clean and mechanical. This was personal, visceral, horrifying in ways that challenged the mind's ability to process what was happening. The psychological impact on destroyer crews was immense. You knew, with absolute certainty, that someone on the other end of that diving aircraft wanted to kill you. Not as collateral damage in a bombing run, not as an unfortunate necessity of war, but as his primary mission, his last act on Earth. The kamikaze pilots were young men, many of them barely trained, with only enough fuel to reach the American fleet and no chance of returning home. They carried letters from their families, photographs of loved ones, and an absolute conviction that their deaths would serve the emperor and save Japan from invasion. Understanding this mindset was nearly impossible for American sailors. The concept of suicide attacks violated every principle of American military doctrine, which emphasized survival and returning to fight another day. But whether you understood it or not was irrelevant. What mattered was that radar screen filling up with blips, each one representing an aircraft that might be carrying a pilot ready to trade his life for yours. So here you are on the bridge of your destroyer, watching those blips get closer. The captain has already maneuvered the ship into position, maximizing the arcs of fire for your anti-aircraft guns. Below decks, damage control parties are standing by with hoses and foam generators. In the Combat Information Center, the fighter director team is frantically trying to vector your combat air patrol toward the incoming raid, but you can already tell there aren't enough fighters to handle this many aircraft. The reality is settling into your gut like ice water. You're about to find out if you can survive a kamikaze attack on a World War II destroyer. The answer depends on dozens of factors, some within your control, many completely beyond it. Your training matters, your shipmates matter, your equipment matters. But so does luck and timing and the trajectory of an aircraft you can't see yet but know is coming. This is what you signed up for, though you didn't know it at the time. You raised your hand and took an oath, and the Navy sent you to the Pacific. And here you are at Radar Picket Station number 1 on a bright April morning in 1945. In a few minutes, the sky will fill with enemy aircraft and everything you've trained for will be put to the ultimate test. The question isn't whether you'll face a kamikaze attack. That's a certainty. The question is whether you'll survive it, and if your ship will survive it with you. To understand your chances of survival, you need to know your ship intimately. Every strength, every weakness, every system and compartment. Because when 1,000 pounds of explosives is screaming toward you at 300 miles per hour, the difference between life and death often comes down to knowing exactly where to be and where not to be. Your home is a Fletcher-class destroyer, probably the most successful destroyer design of World War II. The Navy commissioned 175 of these ships between 1942 and 1944, more than any other destroyer class in American history. She's 376.5 feet long, with a beam of 39 feet 4 inches. At full load, she displaces about 2,500 tons, though by now, after months of modifications and additions, she's probably closer to 2,700 tons. All that extra weight comes from anti-aircraft guns, radar equipment, and ammunition that your ship didn't carry when she first left the builder's yard. The Fletcher was designed in 1939, after the naval treaty limitations finally expired and American designers could build a destroyer without artificial restrictions on displacement. The result was a ship that balanced firepower, speed and endurance better than anything that came before. Your main battery consists of 5 single 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns mounted in weatherproof enclosed turrets. These guns can elevate to 85 degrees, making them useful against both surface targets and aircraft. They fire a 55-pound projectile that can reach an altitude of 37,000 feet, though their effective range against aircraft is much less, maybe 10 to 15,000 feet depending on circumstances. But here's the thing about those 5-inch guns. They're deadly effective against aircraft flying straight and level at high altitude, giving your fire control computers time to calculate a solution. They're far less effective against a kamikaze diving at maximum speed from directly overhead or coming in at wave-top height where you only have seconds to react. The 5-inch guns are your primary defense, but they're not magic. Against kamikazes, you're going to need every weapon you have. That's where your secondary anti-aircraft battery comes in. By now, in April of 1945, your ship has been modified extensively from her original configuration. You started the war with 4 1.1-inch Chicago piano quad mounts, unreliable weapons that frequently jammed. Those have been replaced with 5 twin 40mm Bofors mounts and 7 single 20mm Oerlikon cannons. Some Fletcher-class destroyers have even more, depending on what modifications the Navy Yard could accomplish. The Bofors 40mm is a superb weapon. Each twin mount fires 160 rounds per minute per barrel, sending 2-pound projectiles out to an effective range of 4,000 yards. The quad mounts, which you don't have on a Fletcher, but which you see on larger ships, are absolutely devastating, throwing out almost 300 rounds per minute. The Bofors has good stopping power. If you hit a kamikaze with enough 40mm shells, you can literally tear the aircraft apart in midair. The problem is getting enough hits before the plane reaches you. The 20mm Oerlikon is your last-ditch defense. These are light, free-swinging weapons manned by a single gunner who aims by looking through a ring sight. They fire at 450 rounds per minute, but each projectile is much smaller, about a quarter pound. Against a diving kamikaze, the Oerlikon's main value is letting the rest of the crew know that a plane is about to hit, because if the 20mm gunners are firing, it means something got through all your other defenses. Still, Oerlikon gunners shot down their share of kamikazes, and they earned every bit of credit for it. These men died in their harnesses, firing until the instant of impact, giving their shipmates precious additional seconds. Now let's talk about what your ship is made of. Steel, carbon steel plate, mostly in the range of 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch thick on the hull. That's enough to keep the ocean out and provide structural strength. But it's not armor. Not even close. A kamikaze's bomb can punch right through your deck plating like it's cardboard. Even the aircraft itself, without the bomb detonating, can crash through your superstructure. The Fletcher was designed to fight other destroyers and submarines, not to withstand direct hits from aircraft laden with explosives. The ship's layout reflects her mission. Starting at the bow, you have the forward 5-inch gun mount, designated Mount 51. Then comes the forecastle deck with anchor handling equipment and a breakwater to keep heavy seas from washing over the bow. Moving aft, you reach the pilot house and bridge structure where the captain and his team navigate and fight the ship. Just behind the bridge sits the Combat Information Center, a darkened, radar-equipped room where officers plot contacts and coordinate the ship's defensive systems. Mount 52, the second 5-inch gun, sits right behind the bridge. Then you hit the forward superstructure with the mast, signal bridge, and fire control directors. The forward smokestack rises here, venting exhaust from the forward boiler room. Keep moving aft and you pass the torpedo tubes, 2 quintuple mounts on center line, carrying a total of 10 21-inch torpedoes, though many ships have had one or both mounts removed to make room for additional anti-aircraft guns. The midships section is dominated by the 2 smokestacks and the machinery spaces below. This is where your ship's heart beats, 4 Babcock and Wilcox boilers generating steam at 600 pounds per square inch and 850 degrees Fahrenheit. That steam drives 2 General Electric geared turbines that deliver 60,000 shaft horsepower to your twin screws. This power plant can push your ship to 37 knots in ideal conditions, though sustained high-speed operations usually means you're doing 33 or 34 knots. The aft section of the ship holds mounts 53, 54 and 55, your remaining 3 5-inch guns. The afterdeck includes depth charge racks and K-gun projectors for anti-submarine warfare, though these are less relevant when you're facing air attack. At the very stern, the ship tapers to the fantail where sailors gather when off duty, where you hold burials at sea, and where wounded men can be laid out when the battle rages and there's no other place to put them. Below decks is where 329 men live and work. The enlisted men's berthing compartments are cramped affairs, with bunks stacked 3 high and barely enough room to turn around. You have a small locker for your personal gear, maybe 18 inches wide and 2 feet deep. That's it. Everything you own in the world has to fit in that space, plus the sea bag you keep stored elsewhere. The officers fare slightly better with 2-man staterooms, but even the captain's cabin is smaller than a typical bedroom in a modest house back home. The galley and mess deck occupy valuable space amidships on the main deck. Food is the heart of morale on any warship, and despite the cramped facilities, Navy cooks manage to turn out 3 hot meals a day under normal conditions. The menu is basic, but usually adequate. Powdered eggs for breakfast, meat and potatoes for dinner, soup and sandwiches for the mid-watch meal. Fresh food runs out after a few days at sea, replaced by canned and dried goods. By the time you've been out on picket duty for a couple of weeks, you're eating food that tastes like the inside of a can, and you dream about fresh milk and lettuce. But you don't complain, because you know that Japanese sailors are eating much worse, and you know that Marines ashore on Okinawa would kill for your powdered eggs and canned hash. The engineering spaces, the boiler rooms and engine rooms are separate from the rest of the ship by necessity and design. They're hot, loud, dangerous places even when everything is working correctly. The men who work there, the snipes, operate in an environment where temperatures routinely exceed 120 degrees, where a ruptured steam line can cook you alive in seconds, and where the constant roar of machinery makes normal conversation impossible. These spaces are manned around the clock, watch on watch, with engineers monitoring dozens of gauges and systems to keep your ship moving and her electrical systems running. The critical vulnerability in engineering is that your Fletcher has a split plant configuration. You have 2 boiler rooms and 2 engine rooms arranged in sequence, Forward boiler room, forward engine room, aft boiler room, aft engine room. This setup provides redundancy. If you take a hit in one section, you can still operate on the other, but it's not perfect redundancy. A single well-placed kamikaze strike amidships can potentially disable multiple spaces, crippling your ship's mobility. And without mobility, you're a sitting duck. Compartmentation is your friend, though it's imperfect. The ship is divided by watertight bulkheads and doors that can be sealed to contain flooding. Under normal steaming conditions, many of these doors are open for ease of movement. When you go to general quarters, they all get dogged shut, dividing the ship into isolated compartments. This means that if one compartment floods, it won't necessarily sink the entire ship. But it also means that men can get trapped in flooded or burning compartments with no way out. You'll hear stories from survivors about shipmates pounding on the far side of watertight doors, begging to be let out while water rises around them. Those doors stayed closed because opening them would have sunk the ship and killed everyone. Your ship's electrical system is another critical vulnerability. She has two 350 kilowatt steam turbine-driven generators providing ship's power, plus a 100 kilowatt emergency diesel generator. When a kamikaze hits, the shock can knock out electrical power, plunging portions of the ship into darkness and disabling critical systems. Your damage control teams carry battle lanterns, portable lights on rechargeable batteries, but these provide only limited illumination. Trying to fight fires and control flooding in darkness adds another layer of nightmare to an already desperate situation. The communication systems on your Fletcher include sound-powered phones connecting battle stations, radio systems for talking to other ships and aircraft, and the intership announcing system that lets the captain broadcast to the entire crew. When a kamikaze strikes, communication becomes one of your biggest challenges. Phone lines get severed, radio equipment gets damaged. Sometimes the captain on the bridge has no idea what's happening at the other end of the ship, and damage control parties are making life or death decisions with no guidance from above because they can't reach anyone with authority. Let's talk about stability. Your Fletcher has good seakeeping qualities for a destroyer. She can handle rough seas better than many of her predecessors. But she's also top-heavy with all that radar equipment and anti-aircraft guns mounted high up. When you take damage that floods lower compartments, you can develop a dangerous list, a lean to one side. If the list gets too severe, water can pour through shell holes that would normally be above the waterline, accelerating the flooding. More than one destroyer has capsized and rolled over after taking kamikaze hits that didn't seem fatal at first. The Fletcher's fuel capacity is about 550 tons of Navy special fuel oil, stored in multiple tanks throughout the ship. This gives you a cruising range of about 5,500 nautical miles at 15 knots. When you're steaming at high speed during combat operations, your fuel consumption increases dramatically. You might burn through fuel 5 or even 10 times faster than at cruising speed. This is important because fuel management becomes a life or death issue during extended combat. You need fuel to keep your pumps running, your generators operating, your firefighting systems pressurized. Run out of fuel during a battle and you lose everything. There's no armor to speak of, we've established that, but there's also no ability to take hits and keep fighting the way larger ships can. A battleship like the Iowa can take multiple kamikaze strikes and remain operational. An aircraft carrier can survive fire and flooding that would sink 3 destroyers. You don't have that luxury. On a Fletcher-class destroyer, every hit is potentially catastrophic. Every kamikaze that gets through your defenses has a good chance of killing you or maiming your ship so badly that she'll never fight again. And yet, despite all these vulnerabilities, the Fletcher was a survivor. Of the 175 built, the Navy lost 19 to enemy action during the war. That's a loss rate of under 11%, remarkably low for a class of ships that fought in every major naval engagement in the Pacific. Part of that success came from good design. part came from modifications and improvements made based on combat experience. But most of it came from the training, courage, and determination of the men who served aboard these ships. When you strap into your battle station on a Fletcher-class destroyer, you're not climbing into a tank. You're not surrounded by armor. You're standing on thin steel deck plates, surrounded by explosives, fuel, and 300 other men who are all counting on each other to survive the next few minutes. Your ship is fast, well armed for her size, and commanded by officers who know their business. But she's not invincible, not even close. The destroyermen knew this. They called themselves tin can sailors, with a mix of pride and gallows humor. They knew that carrier pilots looked down on them, literally and figuratively. They knew that battleship crews had better protection and better odds. But they also knew that when the kamikazes came, it was the destroyers out on the radar picket line who took the first hits, who absorbed the attacks that might otherwise have reached the carriers and transports. They knew they were trading their safety for the safety of other ships, and they did it anyway. So this is your ship. 2,000 tons of steel and machinery, crewed by men in their late teens and early 20s, armed with guns that might or might not be enough to stop a determined attack. She'll do 37 knots when you push her, and she'll turn on a dime if you have a skipper who knows how to handle her. She's got good radar, effective guns when you can get them on target, and a damage control organization that's been trained to deal with flooding, fire, and battle damage. Whether that's enough to survive a kamikaze attack depends on factors you won't know until the moment arrives, but at least now you know what you're working with. You know your ship's strengths and her vulnerabilities. You know where the critical systems are located, where you want to be when the attack comes, and where you definitely don't want to be. And you know that in a few minutes, when those bogies on the radar screen close to visual range, you're going to find out just how good this ship really is. If there was a job in the United States Navy that practically guaranteed you would face kamikaze attacks, it was radar picket duty. Not might face them, would face them. The statistics don't lie, and every destroyer sailor knew the score before they steamed out to their assigned station. The concept was simple enough. Ring the island of Okinawa with destroyers equipped with radar, positioned 50 to 80 miles offshore in all directions. These radar picket ships would detect incoming Japanese aircraft while they were still far from the main fleet, providing precious minutes of warning. The fighter director teams aboard the picket destroyers would then vector combat air patrol fighters to intercept the incoming raids, destroying as many aircraft as possible before they reached the amphibious force and the carriers. In theory, it was a brilliant defensive concept. In practice, it turned radar picket duty into a one-way ticket to hell. The Navy established 15 primary radar picket stations around Okinawa, each one designated simply by a number. Not all stations were occupied at all times. The officer in tactical command would determine daily which stations needed coverage based on threat assessments and available ships. Each picket station was defined by its range and bearing from Point Bolo, a reference point on Okinawa's coast. Ships assigned to a station were supposed to stay within a radius of 5,000 yards from the station center, though in practice captains would maneuver more freely when under attack. Station 1, where your ship is now, sits 50 miles due north of Point Bolo. It's the northernmost picket station, which makes it the closest to the Japanese home islands. The kamikazes launching from Kyushu fly south-southwest toward Okinawa, and Station 1 is exactly in their flight path. Every Japanese pilot heading for the American fleet will see you long before they see anything else. You're the tripwire, the canary in the coal mine, the early warning system that gives the fleet time to prepare, and you're paying for that mission with your skin. Stations 2 and 3, just to your east and west, are nearly as exposed. Together, these 3 northernmost stations form a barrier across the most likely approach routes from Japan. The numbers bear this out. Station 1 was hit repeatedly throughout the campaign, with destroyers sunk, damaged, or forced to withdraw on a regular basis. At one point, the crews were grimly joking that Station 1 claimed a destroyer per day, and it wasn't far from the truth. A typical picket station would have 1 or 2 destroyers, sometimes 3 if available. Supporting them would be a couple of small landing craft, usually LCSLs. Landing craft support large, or LSMRs, landing ship medium rocket. These small vessels packed surprising firepower with their 40mm guns and rocket launchers, and they proved invaluable during kamikaze attacks. But they were also frighteningly vulnerable, with thin hulls and minimal protection. Of the 88 LCSLs assigned to picket duty, 2 were sunk and 11 damaged. Of the 11 LSMRs, 3 were sunk and 2 damaged. As a percentage, their casualties were even worse than the destroyers. The isolation was crushing. Out there on the picket line, you're far from the main fleet. There's no friendly battleship nearby with massive anti-aircraft firepower. There's no concentration of carriers whose fighters can establish air superiority over your position. You have what you have, your own guns, whatever combat air patrol the fighter directors can scramble, and whatever other ships are on your station. That's it. When the radar operator picks up a raid, the fighter director team goes into action. They're manning specialized radio equipment, talking directly to the fighter pilots circling over your position. Viceroy 3-1, this is Rainbow Base, Vector 090, Angels 12, hostile bogies inbound. The radio crackles back. Rainbow Base, Viceroy 3-1, Wilco. And off they go. 4 or 6 fighters racing to intercept before the kamikazes reach you. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the fighters splash every incoming aircraft, and you watch the combat air patrol return to their carriers without ever firing a shot from your own guns. But more often, the numbers are against you. A typical combat air patrol might consist of 4 to 8 fighters, usually Grumman F-6F Hellcats or Vought F-4U Corsairs. When the Japanese launch a Kikusui operation with 150 aircraft heading your way, your KP is outnumbered 20 to 1 or worse. The fighters do heroic work, shooting down dozens of attackers, but sheer mathematics means some are going to get through, and when they get through, you're on your own. The picket destroyers maintained constant vigilance. All anti-aircraft guns were manned and ready. Lookouts scanned the sky in all directions, because radar had its limitations. It couldn't see low-flying aircraft until they were much closer, and it couldn't give you altitude information without specialized height-finding radar that not all destroyers carried. Your eyes were often your first warning of a kamikaze coming in at wave-top height, and by the time you saw him, you had seconds to react. The tactical doctrine called for picket destroyers to stay at their stations as long as possible, providing radar coverage even during an attack. But captains had discretion to maneuver violently when kamikazes were inbound, and most did. A destroyer's best defense against a diving aircraft is violent maneuvers, hard rudder, changing speed, turning into the dive to present a smaller target. Your fletcher can turn in a remarkably tight radius when pushed, and a skilled captain can throw off a pilot's aim enough to make him miss. But here's the problem with maneuvering. Your anti-aircraft guns are mounted with fixed arcs of fire. When you're turning hard, some of your guns can't bear on the target. You're forced to choose between presenting the smallest possible target and bringing maximum firepower to bear. There's no good answer, and different captains handled it differently. Some relied on maneuver, trusting their agility more than their guns. Others held steady to give their gunners the best possible shot. Both approaches had their merits and their casualties. The psychological strain was immense. General quarters could last for hours or even days on the picket line. When Japanese snoopers, reconnaissance aircraft, were detected in the area, the ship went to GQ and stayed there until the threat passed. Sometimes the threat didn't pass. Sometimes it evolved into a full-scale attack. Men stood at their battle stations in the tropical sun, baking in steel helmets and life jackets, growing increasingly exhausted and dehydrated. Sleep deprivation became a serious problem. You get maybe 4 hours of rack time between watches, and even that was fitful because you knew the general quarters alarm could sound at any moment. The crew of the USS Anthony summed it up bluntly in their war diary. Their ship was on Destroyer Demobilization Plan Number 5, meaning radar picket duty. The commanding officer told his superiors that after a certain amount of time on the line, no amount of effort could boost morale. The boys knew what they were in for, and you couldn't fool them. And yet they stayed. They steamed out to their assigned stations day after day, knowing that the odds were catching up with them. They maintained their radar watch. They vector-ed their combat air patrol. They provided the early warning that saved countless lives on the amphibious force and the carrier groups. They did their duty even when that duty had morphed into something close to a suicide mission. The statistics from Okinawa tell the brutal tale. 10 destroyers were sunk on radar picket duty. Another 23 were damaged severely enough to be taken out of action. For the rest of the war, many of them would be classified as constructive total losses, damaged beyond economical repair. That's 33 destroyers out of about 100 assigned to picket duty during the campaign. Add in the damaged landing craft, and the numbers get even worse. But it gets more personal when you look at individual ships. The USS Lafay, which we'll discuss in detail later, was attacked by 22 kamikazes in 80 minutes and somehow survived. The USS Manat El Abel was hit by a conventional kamikaze and then struck by an Oka, a rocket-propelled suicide bomb. She sank in 3 minutes, taking 79 men with her. The USS Little was hit by 4 kamikazes in rapid succession and went down so fast that men were jumping into the water as she sank beneath them. The USS Morrison was hit by 4 kamikazes while at Station 1, your station, and sank with the loss of 152 men. The USS Pringle hit a mine on her way to Station 1, had her bow blown off, and was then struck by a kamikaze while her crew was fighting to save her. She went down in 5 minutes. The USS Callahan was the last destroyer sunk by kamikaze attack, hit on July 28, 1945, less than 2 weeks before Japan surrendered. The USS Hugh W. Hadley was attacked by over 150 aircraft at Station 15. She shot down 23 of them before kamikazes struck her. She survived, but barely, and never returned to combat. These weren't abstract statistics to the men on the picket line. These were ships they'd served with, shipmates they'd drunk with at Ulithi or Karama Retto, fellow tin can sailors who'd caught the wrong break at the wrong time. When you heard that the Morrison had gone down at Station 1, you knew that could have been your ship. When you heard that the Abler had been hit by an Oka and sank in under 3 minutes, you wondered if you'd even have time to get off the ship if one of those rocket bombs found you. The waiting was almost as bad as the attacks. Hours of tense vigilance, watching the radar screen, scanning the horizon, jumping at every false alarm, and then the real alarm. The general quarters klaxon screaming through the ship, and you'll run into your battle station knowing this might be it. This might be the attack that gets through your fighters, overwhelms your guns, and sends you to the bottom. The destroyers rotated through picket duty, typically spending several days on station before returning to Keramaretto or Hagushi anchorage for fuel, ammunition, and repair. Even that respite was relative. Keramaretto was called the Bone Yard because of all the damaged ships anchored there, and the anchorage itself came under attack at times. Some ships returned from picket duty and were immediately sent back out, sometimes to the same station, sometimes to a different one. The Navy simply didn't have enough destroyers to provide longer rest periods. Commodore Frederick Moosbrugger, who commanded the destroyers on picket duty, wrote in his after-action report that the performance of the crews had been superb throughout the campaign, but even he acknowledged the strain. The picket stations had been maintained, he noted, but at considerable loss and damage to destroyer types. It was an understated way of saying that the Navy had fed destroyers into a meat grinder, and the destroyers had done their job despite horrific casualties. Your ship has been on Station 1 for 3 days now. You've been to general quarters maybe a dozen times, mostly false alarms or single snoopers that were driven off by fighters. But the big raid hasn't come yet. You know it's coming. The intelligence reports are clear that the Japanese are massing aircraft for another Kikusui operation. You just don't know when. And then the radar operator's voice cuts through your thoughts. Bogies, bearing 350, range 60 miles, closing fast. And suddenly the waiting is over, and the reality of radar picket duty is about to hammer home in the most visceral way possible. This is what you signed up for, though you didn't know it when you enlisted. This is the mission. This is where the Navy needed you. Out here on the most exposed, most dangerous assignment in the fleet. You're the early warning system. You're the first line of defense. You're the sacrifice that buys time for everyone else. And the kamikazes are coming. Before we dive into the chaos of combat, you need to understand what daily life was like aboard your destroyer in the weeks leading up to that moment when the radar screen filled with bogies. Because the men who faced kamikaze attacks weren't fresh, well-rested sailors. They were exhausted, sleep-deprived, worn down by the constant stress of combat operations in the final year of the war. Your day starts before dawn, usually around 0530 or 0600. Reveille sounds throughout the ship, a harsh klaxon that jolts you from whatever fitful sleep you've managed. You roll out of your bunk, a canvas and frame affair stacked 3 high in the berthing compartment, and immediately crack your head on the overhead pipes that run everywhere on a destroyer. You've done this 100 times, and you'll do it 100 more. The compartment is cramped, hot and stuffy despite the ventilation blowers. It smells of sweat, fuel oil, and the peculiar odor of men living in close quarters without enough fresh water for regular showers. You pull on your dungarees, slide your feet into your boondockers, and head for the head, the Navy term for bathroom. The line is already forming. There are maybe 6 toilets for the enlisted men in this compartment, serving close to 100 men. You wait your turn, take care of business, splash some water on your face at one of the sinks, and head for the mess deck. Personal hygiene on a destroyer is a constant challenge. Fresh water is precious, reserved for drinking and critical systems. You shower maybe once a week if you're lucky, using salt water soap that barely lathers and leaves you feeling greasier than before. Your clothes get washed in the ship's laundry, but there's never enough time or water to get everything clean. Breakfast is served on the mess deck, a large compartment amidships with long tables bolted to the deck. You grab a metal tray and shuffle through the chow line, where cooks dispense food with the efficiency of an assembly line. This morning it's powdered eggs, scrambled yellow stuff that tastes vaguely like eggs if you don't think too hard about it, along with toast, canned fruit and coffee that's strong enough to strip paint. The coffee is the most important part. You drink it black because the evaporated milk ran out days ago, and fresh milk is a distant memory. You eat quickly, hunched over your tray at a crowded table, surrounded by shipmates you've lived with for months or years. Conversation is sparse at breakfast. Everyone's still waking up, and besides, you'll have plenty of time to talk during your work period. You rinse your tray in a barrel of hot water, stack it with the others, and head for your workstation. The Navy runs on routine, and despite being in a combat zone, much of that routine continues. If you're a gunner's mate, you're maintaining the 5-inch guns, checking the loading mechanisms, cleaning and inspecting the components. If you're a fire controlman, you're working on the Mark 37 Fire Control Director, the complex analog computer that helps your guns hit their targets. If you're an engineman or machinist's mate, you're down in the sweltering engineering spaces, monitoring the boilers and turbines, checking oil levels, adjusting valves. The work never stops on a destroyer. Every system needs constant maintenance. Salt water corrodes everything. The tropical sun bakes the deck until you can fry an egg on it. Not that you'd waste an egg that way. Equipment breaks down and has to be repaired with whatever spare parts you have on hand. Your ship left the States months ago, and every breakdown since then has been fixed with ingenuity, improvisation, and whatever could be scrounged from other ships. Around noon, you break for lunch. The menu is uninspiring. Maybe spam and canned vegetables, maybe beans and cornbread, maybe some kind of stew that defies identification. The cooks do their best with what they have, but fresh food is long gone. Everything comes from cans or boxes. You eat because you need the calories, not because you enjoy it. The one bright spot is dessert. Navy cooks have a talent for turning out decent cakes and pies, even in the cramped galley of a destroyer. After lunch is back to work. But now the routine changes depending on what's happening. If you're in a relatively safe anchorage like WWII, you might get some liberty, a chance to go ashore to one of the recreation islands the Navy has set up. There's volleyball, maybe a 4, movies shown on an outdoor screen, and most importantly, there's beer. 2 cans per man, cold from refrigeration barges. It's the most luxury you'll see for weeks. But if you're on the radar picket line, there's no liberty. There's only work, watches, and general quarters. The watches are exhausting. You might stand 4 hours on, 8 hours off, but that 8 hours off isn't free time. You've got work to do, meals to eat, equipment to maintain. Maybe you get 4 hours of sleep if you're lucky, and the general quarters alarm doesn't sound. The watch stations vary depending on your rate, your job specialty. Lookouts stand on the bridge wings and in the gun director, scanning the sky with binoculars for any sign of aircraft. Radar operators sit in darkened compartments, eyes glued to radar screens, watching for the telltale blips that indicate incoming raids. Gunners man the anti-aircraft batteries, ready to open fire at a moment's notice. Sonar operators listen for submarines, though that threat is less immediate than the air threat at Okinawa. Down in the engineering spaces, the snipes stand their watches in an environment that's barely endurable. The temperature in the boiler rooms often exceeds 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The noise is constant and deafening, the roar of burners, the hiss of steam, the thunder of turbines. The men who work there communicate with hand signals as much as shouting, because normal conversation is impossible. They drink gallons of water and still end up dehydrated. Heat casualties are common, men collapsing from heat exhaustion and having to be carried topside to recover. Evening meal is around 1700 or 1800 hours, and it's more of the same institutional food. Dinner might be pork chops or meatloaf if you're lucky, more spam if you're not. Canned vegetables, potatoes that started as flakes in a box, bread baked that morning in the ship's ovens, and always coffee. Oceans of it, because coffee is fuel for a Navy crew and you run on coffee as much as you run on fuel oil. After dinner, if you're off watch, you have a few hours of precious free time. You might write a letter home, though mail service is sporadic and you can't tell your family anything specific about where you are or what you're doing. Everything is subject to censorship anyway. An officer reviews every letter to make sure you haven't inadvertently revealed information useful to the enemy. You might play cards with shipmates, acey-deucey or poker or cribbage, with matchsticks or cigarettes as the stakes, since gambling for money is officially prohibited. Some men read dog-eared paperback books that have been passed from sailor to sailor until they're falling apart. Some write in journals, though this is officially discouraged. Some just sit and talk, telling stories about home, about girls they knew, about what they're going to do when the war ends. These conversations are simultaneously hopeful and haunted. Everyone makes plans for after the war, but beneath the words is the unspoken question: will I live to see it? Religious services are held regularly, conducted by the ship's chaplain if you have one, or by the captain if you don't. Attendance varies. Some men are deeply religious, finding comfort in prayer and scripture. Others have lost faith or never had it to begin with. But even the skeptics sometimes find themselves praying when the general quarters alarm sounds and the kamikazes are inbound. The boredom and routine are punctuated by moments of sheer terror. General quarters becomes a drill you practice dozens of times, running to your battle station, donning your helmet and life jacket, checking your equipment. "This is a drill, this is a drill," the loudspeakers announce. You go through the motions, knowing that the next time might be real, and sometimes it is real. The alarm sounds, and this time there's no announcement that it's a drill. Your heart rate spikes, adrenaline floods your system. You run to your station, and now you're strapping into a gun mount or manning a damage control station or standing by in the engine room, and you're waiting to see if this is a false alarm or if today is the day you fight for your life. Most of the time it's a false alarm, or a single snooper that's driven off by fighters. You stand down from GQ and the routine resumes, but the stress accumulates. Each alarm, each close call, each news of another ship hit adds to the weight you're carrying. Sleep becomes harder to come by, not just because of the watch schedule, but because you lie in your bunk and your mind won't shut off. You keep seeing that radar screen filling with bogies. You keep hearing stories about ships that didn't make it. The Navy recognizes this to a degree. Commodore Moose Brugger, commanding the radar picket destroyers, tried to rotate ships off the line regularly. He advocated for more rest time, for better support, for anything that would help his crews endure the strain. But there were never enough ships. The operational tempo was relentless, so you went back out to the picket line again and again until either the war ended or you didn't come back. There were small comforts. The ship had an ice cream maker, a luxury on a Fletcher-class destroyer that made you the envy of older ships without one. Once in a while the crew got ice cream, and that simple treat was a reminder that somewhere back in the States there was normalcy and civilization. The ship's barber would cut hair, the cobbler would repair shoes, the tailor would patch uniforms. These little services maintained a sense of routine and order in the midst of chaos. And there was camaraderie. This is what saved your sanity. You weren't alone. You were surrounded by 300 men who were in the same boat, literally. You depended on each other, not just in combat, but every day. The friendships forged in these conditions were unlike anything you'd experienced before. You knew your shipmates better than you knew your own family, because you lived with them 24 hours a day, shared every hardship, every danger, every moment of fear and relief. When a man died, killed in action or by accident or by disease, the entire crew felt it. You held a burial at sea, committing his body to the deep with military honors, and then you went back to work because there was nothing else to do. His bunk was stripped, his personal effects sent home to his family, and within days another man moved into that space. The Navy couldn't afford sentiment. Neither could you. So this was your life aboard a destroyer in April of 1945. Work, watches, bad food, cramped quarters, sporadic sleep, constant stress, and the knowledge that at any moment the alarm could sound and you'd be fighting for your survival. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't heroic in the way movies would later portray it. It was grinding, exhausting, nerve-wracking duty that tested men in ways they never imagined. And it was about to get a whole lot worse, because right now that alarm is sounding. General quarters. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. The radar screen is lighting up with contacts, dozens of them, and they're heading your way. Your routine is over. Your day of work and watches and bad food is over. Now the real test begins. When those bogies close to visual range and the kamikazes start their attack runs, everything depends on your guns. You need to understand these weapons, what they can do, what they can't do, and what your chances are of stopping an incoming attack. Let's start with your primary anti-aircraft weapon, the 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose gun. You have 5 of them, each mounted in a weatherproof, power-operated turret. These are the same guns that destroyed Japanese surface forces at Iron Bottom Sound, that hammered shore installations during island bombardments, and that shot down hundreds of enemy aircraft. They're magnificent weapons, the backbone of American naval firepower in World War II. The 5-inch 38 fires a 55-pound projectile at a muzzle velocity of 2,600 feet per second. The barrel is 59 feet long. That's what the 38 caliber designation means, 38 times the bore diameter. Maximum elevation is 85 degrees, though practical anti-aircraft engagement usually happens at lower elevations. Rate of fire is 15 to 22 rounds per minute, depending on the crew's training and stamina. Each gun has a crew of about 15 men: gun captain, pointers, trainers, loaders, and ammunition passers who form a human chain from the magazine to the gun. The loading mechanism is semi-automatic. After each shot, the breech opens automatically and ejects the spent shell casing. A crew member rams a new 63-pound powder case into the chamber, followed by the 55-pound projectile. The breech closes, the Ishi gun captain applies electrical fire, and the gun roars again. In practiced hands, this cycle happens in less than 3 seconds. Your 5-inch guns can throw 100 rounds per minute into the sky when all 5 mounts are firing. But here's the problem with the 5-inch guns against kamikazes. They're not magic. The fire control system, the Mark 37 Director coupled with the Mark WWII fire control computer, is an analog marvel, capable of calculating ballistic solutions for moving targets. But it needs time. It needs the target to maintain a predictable course long enough for the solution to be valid. A kamikaze diving from altitude at maximum speed, jinking and weaving, presents an incredibly difficult target. The proximity fuse helps. This is one of the war's most important technical advances, a radar-equipped fuse that detonates the shell when it comes within lethal range of the target. With a proximity fuse, you don't need a direct hit. A near miss will shred an aircraft with shell fragments. The 5-inch proximity fused round has a lethal radius of about 70 feet. That seems like a lot until you realize that an aircraft moving at 300 miles per hour covers that distance in a fraction of a second. Against a high-altitude bomber, flying straight and level, your 5-inch battery is deadly. Against a kamikaze diving from directly overhead or coming in at wave-top height, it's much less effective. The gun can only turn horizontally at 25 degrees per second. It can only elevate at 15 degrees per second. If a kamikaze comes at you from an unexpected angle, you might not get the guns on target before he hits. This is why your intermediate anti-aircraft battery is so critical. The 40mm Bofors fills the gap between the long-range 5-inch guns and the close-range 20mm Oerlikons. Your ship has 5 twin 40mm mounts, and if you're lucky, maybe 1 or 2 quad mounts that were added during your last refit. Each twin mount has a crew of 7 men: gun captain, pointer, trainer, 2 first loaders, and 2 second loaders. The Bofors fires a 2-pound projectile at the rate of 160 rounds per minute per barrel. That's a twin mount putting out 320 rounds per minute, or a quad mount firing almost 640 rounds per minute. The rounds are fed from 4-round clips that the loaders slam into the gun in a continuous rhythm. When a 40mm mount is firing at full speed, it's a ballet of coordinated motion, loaders grabbing clips, slamming them home, the pointer and trainer tracking the target, shells streaming out in a visible arc of tracers. The effective range is about 4,000 yards, though practical engagement against a fast-moving aircraft is more like 2,000 yards. The Bofors can track faster than the 5-inch guns, and it delivers much higher volume of fire. A kamikaze, hit by multiple 40mm rounds, will start to come apart. Wings shredding, control surfaces blowing off. The pilot killed in his cockpit if he's not already committed to his dive. But even the Bofors has limitations. The gun itself is water-cooled and can fire continuously for long periods, but the loaders get tired. Slamming those 4-round clips home, maintaining the rhythm, it's exhausting work. After a few minutes of sustained fire, the loaders are gasping for breath, their arms burning with fatigue. And if a round jams in the feed mechanism, which happens, the gun goes silent while the crew clears it. In combat, those few seconds can be the difference between shooting down an attacker and taking a hit. The fire control for the Bofors typically comes from a Mark 51 Director, which is essentially a gun sight mounted on a small platform. A director operator tracks the target visually through the sight, and the system generates bearing and elevation commands that are sent to the gun mount. It's simpler and faster than the 5-inch fire control system, but it still requires skill and a steady hand. The director operator is painting the target with his eyes, and the gunners are trusting him to lead them to the right point in the sky. Some 40mm mounts don't even have directors. They're fired in local control, with the pointer and trainer tracking the target by eye through simple ring sights. This is more instinctive, more reactive, and actually works pretty well against targets coming straight at you. But it requires experienced gunners who can estimate lead and deflection by feel, and even experienced gunners miss more often than they hit. Now we get to your last-ditch defense, the 20mm Oerlikon. Your ship has 7 single mounts scattered around the superstructure, wherever there was space to bolt one to the deck. Each Oerlikon is a free-swinging gun manned by a single gunner who stands behind it, holding the grips, his shoulder against the shoulder rest, his eye looking through a ring sight. The Oerlikon fires a quarter-pound projectile at 450 rounds per minute. The ammunition comes from a 60-round drum magazine mounted on top of the gun. When the gun runs empty, which takes only 8 seconds of continuous fire, the gunner has to reload, pulling off the empty drum and slamming a full one onto the mount. In the heat of combat, with adrenaline surging and an aircraft diving at you, this is a fumbling, desperate action that takes longer than you'd think. The effective range of an Oerlikon is only about 1,000 yards, and practical engagement is more like 500 yards. By the time a Kamikaze gets that close, you have maybe 2 or 3 seconds before impact. This is why veteran destroyer sailors said the main value of the 20mm battery was to warn the rest of the crew that a plane was about to hit. If the Oerlikons are firing, it means something got through everything else. But don't discount the Oerlikon. These gunners scored their share of kills, often at point-blank range. They stood there in their open mounts, completely exposed to enemy fire, and they kept shooting even when the Kamikaze was so close they could see the pilot's face. Many Oerlikon gunners died in the straps, the harness that held them, in position, still firing at the instant of impact. They earned every bit of credit they received. The human factor is enormous. All these weapons, 5-inch, 40mm, 20mm, are only as good as the men who man them. And those men are young, many of them still in their teens. They've been trained, yes, but training and combat are different animals. In training, the target sleeves are towed at predictable speeds and altitudes. In combat, the targets are trying to kill you, and they're moving in unpredictable ways. Fatigue is a killer. You've been at general quarters for hours. Your arms are tired from holding binoculars or manning a gun. Your back aches. You're dehydrated because you've been sweating in the tropical sun. When the attack finally comes, you need to react instantly, track accurately, shoot straight. But you're not at your best. Nobody is. This is the reality of sustained combat operations. Everyone is fighting at maybe 70 or 80% of their peak capability because they're exhausted, stressed, and worn down. Fear affects performance. When you see a Kamikaze diving at your ship, your natural instinct is to duck, to take cover, to get away from the exposed gun mount. But you can't. Your shipmates are counting on you. If you stop shooting, the aircraft gets through and everyone dies. So you stay at your station and you keep your hands on the gun and you try to steady your breathing and lead the target and fire, fire, fire until either the plane goes down or it hits. Ammunition consumption is staggering. In a sustained anti-aircraft engagement, your ship can burn through thousands of rounds. Each 5-inch gun can fire maybe 300 to 400 rounds before the crew is completely exhausted. Each 40mm mount might fire 2,000 or 3,000 rounds. The 20mm guns go through their drum magazines so fast that you need a steady supply of full drums being passed up from the magazine. When you run out of ammunition, you're defenseless. This happened to some ships during extended attacks. They literally ran out of ammunition for some or all of their anti-aircraft guns and had to rely on maneuver alone to avoid kamikazes. The coordination between different weapon systems is critical but imperfect. Ideally, the 5-inch guns engage targets at long range, shooting them down or driving them off before they get close. The 40mm guns take over at intermediate range, shredding aircraft that make it through the 5-inch barrage. The 20mm guns are the last line, firing at anything that gets within close range. But in the war, chaos of an attack with multiple aircraft coming from different directions, this layered defense breaks down. Gunners are engaging whatever targets they can see, sometimes shooting at the same aircraft, sometimes missing aircraft that come in from blind spots. Friendly fire is a real hazard. When you have multiple gun mounts firing in all directions, with shells crossing each other's paths, accidents happen. Shell fragments from 40mm rounds can damage your own ship, even though they're proximity fused for air targets. The muzzle blast from one gun can injure crew members nearby if they're not careful. And in the confusion of battle, with smoke obscuring visibility, gunners sometimes fire at friendly aircraft that haven't been properly identified. The best anti-aircraft crews develop an almost instinctive rhythm. The gun captain calls out bearings, "Target, port side, low!" The pointer and trainer swing the gun mount, and the loaders are already grabbing the next clip or shell before the current one is fired. The director operator is tracking, adjusting his aim, leading the target. When everything clicks, when the crew is working as a perfectly synchronized unit, it's almost beautiful to watch. A deadly, precise machine dedicated to one purpose, keeping the aircraft away from your ship. But even the best crews have bad days, equipment malfunctions, a shell jams in the breech, a gun mount loses hydraulic power and has to switch to manual operation, slowing everything down. The fire control radar gets knocked out by a near miss. Suddenly your carefully coordinated defense has holes in it, and the kamikazes will find those holes because that's what they're trained to do. Your anti-aircraft battery represents thousands of hours of training, millions of dollars of equipment, and hundreds of men dedicated to one mission: stopping the kamikazes before they reach your ship. When it works, you shoot down the attackers and sail away unscathed. When it doesn't work, when the aircraft comes in from a blind spot, or your gunners are a half-second slow, or you're just unlucky, then your weapons didn't save you, and now you're fighting a different battle. The battle to keep your ship afloat and your crew alive. And that's the battle we're about to describe. To understand what you're facing, you need to get inside the mind of the kamikaze pilot. Not to sympathize, you're trying to kill each other, after all, but to understand his tactics, his training, his approach, because that knowledge might save your life. The word kamikaze means divine wind, referring to typhoons that destroyed Mongol invasion fleets in the 13th century. But the Japanese military called these units Tokubetsu Kogekitai, special attack units. The kamikazes emerged in October 1944 during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, when Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi organized the first official suicide attack units from young pilots who volunteered for what everyone knew was a one-way mission. By April 1945, the kamikaze program has matured into a systematic operation. The Japanese are launching massive coordinated attacks, the Kikusui operations, sending hundreds of aircraft in waves toward the American fleet off Okinawa. These attacks include both suicide aircraft and conventional fighters and bombers providing escort and diversion. The goal is overwhelming the American defenses through sheer numbers. The kamikaze pilots are, for the most part, young men with minimal flight training. Early in the war, Japanese pilots trained for 500 hours before being considered combat ready. By 1945, kamikaze pilots might have as little as 40 to 60 hours of flight time, barely enough to take off, fly straight and level, and crash into a target. They're not being taught to land because they won't need to land. They're not being taught dog fighting because they're not supposed to engage in dogfights. They're being taught 3 things: how to find the American fleet, how to approach their target, and how to aim for the most vital parts of the ship. Navigation is handled by the escort aircraft. The kamikazes fly in formation with experienced pilots who guide them to the target area. Once they have the American fleet in sight, the kamikazes break formation and select their individual targets. This is why you sometimes see lone kamikazes arriving at odd times. They've gotten separated from their group and are proceeding on their own, hoping to find a ship to hit before running out of fuel. 2 primary approach methods have been developed. The high-altitude approach involves climbing to around 10,000 feet, positioning yourself above and behind the target ship, and then diving at maximum speed. This gives you an altitude advantage and makes it harder for anti-aircraft fire to hit you during the initial approach. The dive angle is steep, 45 to 60 degrees, with the aircraft accelerating to maximum speed. At the last moment, the pilot aims for the ship's most vulnerable point, the bridge, a gun mount, or the base of the superstructure where fire can spread throughout the ship. The critical point comes just before impact. The pilots are warned repeatedly in training, do not close your eyes. If you close your eyes instinctively in the final second, you'll miss the target. You have to keep your eyes open, keep the aircraft pointed at the target all the way to impact. This requires tremendous discipline and courage, or fanaticism, depending on your perspective. Either way, it's effective. The low-altitude approach is more difficult but potentially more deadly. The aircraft comes in at wave-top height, 50 to 150 feet above the water, flying just above the surface to avoid radar detection. At this altitude, you're practically invisible until you're within a few miles of your target. The disadvantage is that you have to navigate around the screen of American destroyers that are positioned in a protective ring. If one of them spots you, you're exposed to concentrated fire from multiple ships. But if you make it through the screen, you're suddenly right on top of your target ship with almost no warning. The low-altitude approach also takes advantage of a weakness in anti-aircraft defenses. It's harder to depress guns to engage targets coming in at deck level. Your 5-inch guns might not bear on a low-flying aircraft until it's too close. Your 40mm and 20mm guns will engage, but they have only seconds to do their work. The kamikazes also use diversionary tactics. While one group makes a high-altitude approach, drawing the attention of your gun crews and combat air patrol, another group comes in low. Or conventional bombers drop window, aluminum foil strips that create false radar returns, while the kamikazes use the confusion to close the distance. Some kamikazes deliberately fake a crash into the water, pulling up at the last second and then making their real attack, while your gunners think they've scored a kill. The psychological conditioning these pilots receive is intense. They're indoctrinated with the idea that their deaths will save Japan from invasion, that they'll be remembered as heroes, that their sacrifice has spiritual significance. They're told they'll meet again at Yasukuni Shrine, where the spirits of Japan's war dead are honored. Many pilots carry letters and mementos from their families, along with their military orders and photographs of the emperor. Some pilots are true believers, fully committed to the kamikaze philosophy. Others are coerced or pressured into volunteering, though the degree of coercion varies. Once you've volunteered, backing out is effectively impossible without bringing shame on yourself and your family, so even pilots who have doubts go through with it, because the alternative is worse than death. The aircraft used vary depending on what's available. The Mitsubishi A6M0 is the most common. It's fast, maneuverable, and by this point in the war, outclassed by American fighters anyway. Better to use it as a suicide weapon than lose it in a dogfight. The Yokosuka D4Y Judy dive bomber is another favorite, capable of carrying a substantial bomb load. Even older aircraft like the Nakajima B5N, Kate torpedo bomber get pressed into kamikaze service. Then there's the Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, the cherry blossom. Americans call it the baka, which means idiot or fool in Japanese. This is a purpose-built kamikaze weapon, essentially a manned rocket bomb. It's carried beneath a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber until close to the target, then released. The pilot ignites the rocket motor and accelerates to over 600 miles per hour. At that speed, you can't shoot it down with conventional anti-aircraft fire. If an oka is released successfully and locks onto your ship, you're probably dead. The USS Manat El Arbele learned this the hard way. Hit by an oka, she sank in 3 minutes. The kamikaze pilots aim for specific parts of your ship based on training. The bridge is a prime target because destroying it can leave the ship without command and control. The base of the superstructure is attractive because a fire starting there can spread through multiple decks. Gun mounts are targeted to reduce your defensive capability. Some pilots aim for the waterline if they can, hoping the bomb will blow a hole below the surface and cause rapid flooding. What makes the kamikaze effective isn't just the explosive impact, it's the combination of effects. The aircraft itself, weighing several thousand pounds, hits with tremendous kinetic energy. The bomb detonates, creating blast and fragmentation damage. The fuel tanks rupture, spreading hundreds of gallons of burning aviation gasoline. All of this happens in the same instant, creating a catastrophe that your damage control teams have to address simultaneously. Fire, flooding, structural damage, casualties, all at once. And here's the thing that really makes your blood run cold. The kamikaze is adaptable. If his primary approach isn't working, he'll try another. If anti-aircraft fire is too intense from one direction, he'll break off and come in from another angle. If he's too damaged to reach his intended target, he'll crash into whatever ship is closest. The human element makes the kamikaze unpredictable in ways that a guided missile wouldn't be for another 50 years. So when you see that formation of aircraft breaking up and individual kamikazes starting their attack runs, you're not facing a mechanical threat. You're facing young men who are absolutely committed to hitting your ship or dying in the attempt. And since they're going to die either way, they don't have enough fuel to return home. There's no reason for them to hold back, no instinct for self-preservation that might make them abort the attack. This is what's bearing down on you right now. Multiple aircraft, multiple approach angles, pilots who will not turn away no matter how much you shoot at them. Your only hope is to destroy them before they reach you, and the mathematics say that some of them will get through. To really understand what you're about to face, let's look at what happened to the US Lafay on April 16th, 1945. Same day you're fighting, same picket station, Station 1, 50 miles north of Okinawa. The Lafay's ordeal represents the most intense kamikaze attack any single destroyer survived, and her story tells you exactly what surviving a kamikaze attack requires. The Lafay is an Allen M. Sumner-class destroyer, slightly larger than your Fletcher but with similar capabilities. She's commanded by Commander Frederick Julian Beckton, a battle-hardened officer who previously served as executive officer on the destroyer USS Aaron Ward during the brutal night fighting off Guadalcanal. Beckton survived that action and had brought hard-won lessons to his command of the Lafay. Those lessons are about to be tested beyond anything he imagined. It's 0827 when the first kamikaze approaches. A Yokosuka D-3A Val dive bomber appears on the port bow, flying low. The Lafay's 5-inch guns open fire immediately, but the aircraft is moving fast and close to the water. The 40mm Bofors guns join in, tracers reaching out toward the Val. The aircraft is hit multiple times. You can see pieces flying off, but it keeps coming. At the last second, the pilot pulls up slightly and crashes into the ship just aft of the No. 3 5-inch mount. The impact is devastating. The aircraft's bomb detonates on contact, blowing a hole in the deck and starting fires immediately. Aviation gasoline from the plane's fuel tanks spreads burning fuel across the aft deckhouse. 3 men are killed instantly. The 40mm gun crews in that area are engulfed in flames, and sailors are jumping over the side, their clothes on fire. But this is just the beginning. The Laffy has been marked. The kamikaze pilots have identified her as their target, and they're coming in waves. 2 minutes later, another Val makes its approach from the starboard side. The gun crews are already firing at maximum rate, and this aircraft takes heavy hits. It starts to burn in mid-air, pieces of wing and fuselage flying off, but the pilot keeps it aimed at the ship. The Val crashes into the aft 5-inch mount, Mount 53, right where the first kamikaze just hit. The bomb detonates inside the mount, instantly killing everyone inside and destroying the gun completely. The magazine below is threatened by fire, and if it goes up, the entire aft section of the ship will be obliterated. 30 seconds pass. A third Val appears, diving from the stern. This one is hit by multiple 40mm guns and starts disintegrating in the air, but momentum carries it forward. It crashes into the already burning Mount 53 area, adding more fuel and explosives to the inferno. 4 men are killed, others are wounded, and the medical team is overwhelmed before the attack is 5 minutes old. Commander Beckton is on the bridge, maneuvering the ship violently, trying to throw off the attacker's aim. The Laffy heels hard over as she turns, and her wake churns white behind her. But the ship is committed to her picket station. She has to maintain radar coverage and keep the fighter direction team operational. Beckton can maneuver, but he can't run. At 08:30, a fourth Val comes in from astern, dropping a bomb before crashing. The bomb hits 2 feet inboard of the deck edge and detonates, jamming the rudder at 26 degrees to port. Now the Laffy can't maneuver properly. She's stuck in a constant turn, steaming in circles. Beckton orders the engine room to adjust speed to compensate, and the ship continues to fight, but she's lost her best defensive capability: the combat. Air Patrol is trying desperately to help. 4 Marine F4U Corsairs from the escort carrier, Shamrock Bay, dive into the fray, shooting down kamikazes before they reach the Laffy. But there are too many aircraft. For every one the Marines shoot down, 2 more get through. A 5th kamikaze strikes at 08:39. This one hits the forward 40mm gun mount, killing the entire crew and starting another major fire. The fire spreads to the ready ammunition stored around the gun position, and 40mm shells start cooking off, sending projectiles in all directions. Men take cover behind anything solid, but there's nowhere truly safe on a destroyer under attack. At 08:42, 2 kamikazes attack simultaneously. One crashes into the port side of the fantail, the other hits the starboard side aft. Both carry bombs. Both bombs detonate. The aft section of the Laffy is now a raging inferno, with fires burning out of control and spreading forward. The ship is down by the stern, flooding is progressing, and Beckton has multiple reports of casualties flooding into the bridge. A junior officer asked the captain if they should prepare to abandon ship. Beckton's response becomes legendary: "No, I'll never abandon ship as long as a single gun will fire." And the guns keep firing. Despite the fires, despite the flooding, despite the casualties, the surviving gun crews stay at their stations and keep shooting. The forward 5-inch mounts are still operational. Some 40mm mounts are still firing. The 20mm Oerlikon gunners are engaging targets at point-blank range, dying in their harnesses but taking kamikazes with them. The attack continues for 80 minutes. 22 kamikaze aircraft attack the Laffy. The combat air patrol and the ship's gunners shoot down 9 of them before they reach the ship. But 6 kamikazes crash into the Laffy and 4 bombs score direct hits. That's 10 separate impacts, each one bringing explosives, fire, and destruction. The damage is catastrophic. The entire aft section of the ship is wrecked. Mount 53 is destroyed. Mount 54 is damaged. Multiple 40mm and 20mm guns are knocked out. Fires rage from the mainmast aft to the fantail. The ship is flooding in multiple compartments. 32 men are dead. More than 70 are wounded, many with terrible burns. but the Laffy stays afloat. The damage control teams work miracles, fighting fires with portable pumps because the main fire system is damaged. They shore up bulkheads to slow the flooding. They jettison ammunition before it can cook off and cause secondary explosions. They treat wounded men in the midst of the battle right there on the deck because the wardroom that usually serves as a battle dressing station is too damaged to use. Commander Beckton keeps the ship fighting. When communication with the aft steering position is lost, he uses engine orders alone to maintain some control. When power is knocked out to forward guns, crews switch to manual operation and keep firing. When radio equipment is damaged, signalmen use flags and lights to communicate with the combat air patrol. The combat air patrol pilots witness the entire ordeal. They see the Laffy taking hit after hit, fires erupting, the ship developing a list, and they're sure she's going down. But she doesn't go down. She keeps fighting, keeps shooting, keeps steaming in her damaged circle, and gradually the attack intensity decreases as the kamikazes are shot down or driven off. By 0947, the attack is over. The last kamikaze has been splashed by fighters or destroyed by the ship's guns. The Laffy is still afloat, still making way under her own power, though barely. She looks like she should be on the bottom, fires burning, superstructure wrecked, listing to port down by the stern. Naval historian Samuel Eliot Morrison would later write, "Probably no ship has ever survived an attack of the intensity that Laffy experienced." The Laffy limps back to the anchorage at Kiramaretto with assistance from other ships. There, divers inspect the damage below the waterline and find it's even worse than thought. The ship receives temporary repairs, enough to make her seaworthy for the voyage home, and then makes the long journey to Puget Sound Navy Yard in Washington State for complete reconstruction. The crew receives a Presidential Unit Citation. Commander Beckton receives the Navy Cross. Numerous crew members receive Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, and other decorations. But more importantly, they survive. Out of 336 men aboard, 304 are still alive when the Laffy reaches port. In a battle where 6 kamikazes hit your ship and 4 bombs strike you directly, that's a survivable outcome only because of training, courage, damage control, and a commanding officer who refused to give up. The Laffy's story shows you what's possible. You can survive multiple kamikaze hits. You can fight through catastrophic damage. You can keep your ship afloat and bring your crew home, but it requires everything: perfect damage control, brave men who stay at their stations, leadership that inspires rather than panics, and yes, a substantial measure of luck. Because here's the other lesson from the Laffy. She was extraordinarily fortunate in where she was hit. None of the kamikazes struck the bridge directly, though several came close. None hit the forward engineering spaces, none detonated a magazine. If just one of those 22 aircraft had struck in a slightly different location, the Laffy might have sunk in minutes instead of fighting for 80 minutes and surviving. So as you watch those aircraft diving toward your own ship right now, as you hear the roar of your guns and see the tracers reaching up toward the enemy, you're thinking about the Laffy. You're hoping your crew is as well trained as hers. You're hoping your captain is as determined as Commander Beckton. You're hoping that if you take a hit, it won't be in exactly the wrong spot, because the Laffy survived, but other ships on radar picket duty didn't, and you're about to find out which group your ship belongs to. The kamikaze crashes into your ship amidships, just aft of the bridge. The impact is like nothing you've ever experienced, a tremendous crashing sound, the entire ship shuddering, and then the roar of the explosion as the bomb detonates. You're thrown to the deck by the blast. Your ears are ringing. Smoke and fire erupt from the point of impact, and you can hear men screaming. This is where survival begins, not with your guns. They already did their job or failed to do it. Now everything depends on damage control. Can you contain the fires? Can you stop the flooding? Can you keep your ship afloat long enough to get help or make it back to port? These next few minutes will determine whether you live or die. The first response is automatic because you've drilled for this 1,000 times. Damage Control Central, a compartment amidships with plotting boards showing every system in the ship, is where the Damage Control Officer coordinates the response. Reports flood in over sound-powered phones. Fire in the afterdeck house. Flooding in frame 68. Mount 53 is out of action. Casualties. The DCA plots each report on his board, assessing the damage, and starts directing repair parties to where they're needed most. But here's the reality. The communication system is partially knocked out. Some of those reports aren't getting through because the phone lines are severed. The DCA is working with incomplete information, making decisions based on what he knows and what he can guess. Meanwhile, the repair parties are already moving, because they don't need orders to respond to fires and flooding. They can see with their own eyes. Your ship has multiple repair parties, each one responsible for a section of the ship. Repair 2 covers the forward part of the ship. Repair 3 handles amidships. Repair 5 is responsible for the aft section. Each repair party has trained men equipped with damage control gear, portable pumps called handy billies, hoses, foam generators, wooden shoring beams, patches, tools, and emergency lighting. The fire is your immediate concern, because fire can destroy a destroyer faster than anything except a magazine explosion. The Kamikaze's aviation gasoline has spread across the deck and into damaged compartments, creating an intense petroleum fire that water alone won't extinguish. You need foam, chemical foam that smothers the fire by cutting off oxygen. But the foam system might be damaged. The fire main, the piped water system that feeds hoses throughout the ship, might be ruptured. So you're using portable equipment, handy billy pumps powered by gasoline engines, sucking water from over the side and pushing it through hoses too.
The fire. These pumps are unreliable. They clog, they overheat, they break down. You're kicking them, cursing them, getting them running again because you have no choice. The heat is incredible. The fire is burning at over 1,000 degrees, hot enough that steel starts to glow red, hot enough that paint on nearby bulkheads is bubbling and smoking. The men fighting the fire are wearing asbestos suits, thick, heavy garments that provide some protection but also trap heat. They can only work for a few minutes at a time before they have to retreat, gasping for air, drinking water, and then going back in. Smoke is as dangerous as the fire itself. Thick, black, toxic smoke fills compartments, making it impossible to see and difficult to breathe. Men are wearing gas masks or breathing through wet rags, but it's not enough. You hear someone coughing, choking, and then they collapse. You drag them out, get them to fresh air, and someone else takes their place on the hose. Meanwhile, flooding is progressing. The Kamikaze's bomb punched a hole in the deck, and damage below the waterline is letting seawater pour in. You're trying to plug the holes, but you can't reach them while the compartment is flooded and full of smoke. So you're using portable pumps to dewater the space, pumping the flooding out faster than it's coming in, gaining a few precious inches so you can see what you're working with. The shoring parties are using wooden beams to prop up damaged bulkheads that are bulging inward from water pressure. If that bulkhead collapses, the flooding will spread to additional compartments, and you might lose the entire forward section of the ship. So you're wedging those shoring beams into place, hammering them tight, praying they hold. Patching is crude but effective. You've got plywood sheets, rubber gaskets, bolts, and determination. You're bolting patches over holes, using whatever materials you can find. Mattresses from berthing compartments get stuffed into gaps. Wooden doors get torn off hinges and used as patches. Anything that will slow the water is fair game. Commander Beckton, because this is still the Laffey's story, but it could be your story, makes a critical decision. He orders all non-essential personnel to move to the forward part of the ship, keeping weight off the flooding aft section. This helps counteract the list and keeps the aft compartments from flooding faster. It's a simple physics solution that might save the ship. The casualty situation is desperate. Men are wounded, burned, trapped in damaged compartments. The medical team, a pharmacist's mate and his assistants, sets up a battle dressing station wherever they can find space. They're treating burns with tannic acid or petroleum jelly, wrapping them in bandages, giving morphine for pain. They're applying tourniquets to stop bleeding. They're doing triage, deciding who can be saved and who is beyond help. The worst cases are the burn victims. Aviation gasoline burns at a temperature that causes deep tissue damage. Men have clothing burned into their skin. They have third-degree burns over large percentages of their bodies. Without proper treatment, they'll die from infection or shock within hours or days. All the pharmacist's mate can do is ease their pain and keep them alive until they can be evacuated to a hospital ship. Some men are trapped in flooded or burning compartments behind closed, watertight doors. You can hear them pounding on the doors, screaming to be let out. But opening those doors would flood or burn adjacent compartments, killing everyone in them and possibly sinking the ship. The decision to keep those doors closed is the hardest decision anyone on the ship has to make, but it's the right decision. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Secondary explosions are a constant threat. The Kamikaze's impact has ruptured ready ammunition storage around the anti-aircraft guns. As the fire spreads, these shells start cooking off, 40mm rounds exploding randomly, sending projectiles and fragments flying across the deck. Men are hit by exploding ammunition that was supposed to be used against the enemy. You're throwing ammunition overboard to prevent worse explosions, jettisoning thousands of dollars worth of ordnance because it's become a hazard to your own ship. The engineering spaces are critical. If you lose power, you lose everything: pumps, lights, firefighting systems, steering. The snipes down in the boiler and engine rooms are isolated from most of the battle, but they're getting reports over the sound-powered phones, and they know the ship is in trouble. They're keeping the boilers lit, the turbines turning, the generators running. When one generator is knocked out by the Kamikaze hit, they switch to the backup. When steam pressure drops, they adjust their burners to compensate. Electrical casualties are widespread. The ship's electrical system is damaged, with power out to multiple compartments. Electricians are working in darkness with flashlights, tracing circuits, bypassing damaged sections, restoring power wherever possible. Every light that comes back on, every pump that starts running, represents another small victory in the fight to save the ship. The firefighting effort is paying off. After 30 minutes of sustained work, the fires are starting to come under control. You're making progress, pushing the flames back, keeping them from spreading to new areas. The foam has smothered most of the gasoline fire. Water hoses are cooling hot steel. The smoke is thinning enough that you can see what you're doing. Flooding control is harder. Water weighs a lot. A flooded compartment can add hundreds of tons to your displacement, changing your trim and stability. You're pumping constantly with every available pump, but the flooding is stubborn. Water finds its way through cracks and ruptures you can't reach. You're gaining slowly, but it's exhausting work that requires multiple repair parties working in coordination. The ship is still fighting, still making way, though her speed is reduced and her maneuverability is compromised. Some gun mounts are still operational, and they're tracking the sky in case more kamikazes come. Because the attack isn't necessarily over. Just because you took one hit doesn't mean you won't take another. Communication with the outside world is difficult. Your primary radio equipment is damaged, but backup systems allow limited communication. You're sending out damage reports, requesting assistance, coordinating with other ships in the area. A destroyer escort is moving in to provide anti-aircraft support and assistance if needed. You're not alone out here, though it felt that way during the attack. Commander Beckton assesses the situation. The fires are under control. The flooding is contained. Casualties are being treated. The ship is damaged but still underway. He makes the decision to attempt to return to the anchorage under the ship's own power, rather than wait for a tow. This keeps the crew focused on saving their ship rather than abandoning her, and it proves to be the right call. The journey back takes hours. The Laffy limps along at reduced speed, her crew working constantly to keep her afloat. Pumps run continuously. Damage control parties monitor every compartment for signs of progressive flooding or renewed fires. The wounded are made as comfortable as possible in improvised sick bays. When you finally reach the anchorage, other ships' crews line the rails to watch you come in. They've heard what happened on the radio net. They see a ship that looks like she should be on the bottom, burning, listing, trailing smoke, her superstructure wrecked. But she's still making way, still under her own power, her battle flag still flying. This is what damage control can accomplish. This is what trained men working together, refusing to give up, can achieve. The ship was hit 6 times by kamikazes and 4 times by bombs. She should have sunk, but she didn't, because the crew fought for her. And that's the lesson you take from this. When the kamikaze hits, the battle isn't over. It's just beginning. Your survival depends on what you do in the minutes and hours that follow. Can you control the fires? Can you stop the flooding? Can you keep your engineering plant running? Can you treat the wounded? Can you hold your ship together long enough to get help or make it to safety? If the answer to these questions is yes, you might survive. If the answer is no, you're going to the bottom. It's that simple and that brutal. Damage control is the difference between the USS Laffy sailing home and the USS Morrison sinking at this same station with 152 men lost. So you drill, you train, you practice. You learn where every pump is located, where every hose is stored, where every patch and every shore is kept. Because when the moment comes, you won't have time to figure it out. You'll only have time to act. The pharmacist's mate is 22 years old. He's had medical training, but nothing prepared him for this. The wardroom has been converted into a battle dressing station, but it's too close to where the kamikaze hit, and now it's partially damaged and filling with smoke. So he's set up an improvised casualty station on the main deck, forward of the damage, anywhere he can find space. The wounded are everywhere. Some walk to him on their own, holding injuries, blood soaking through their uniforms. Others are carried by shipmates, unconscious or screaming in pain. The most severely wounded are laid out on deck, and he has to decide right now, this instant, who he can help and who is beyond his limited capabilities. This is triage in its rawest form. The walking wounded, men with cuts, minor burns, fragments embedded in their flesh, are directed to sit against a bulkhead and wait. They're conscious, they're stable, they can wait. The men who are critical but savable, major bleeding, serious burns, chest or abdominal injuries, those are his priority. And the men who are too far gone, who won't survive no matter what he does, they get morphine for the pain and whatever comfort he can provide in their last minutes. The most common injuries are burns. When the kamikaze hit and aviation gasoline spread burning across the deck, men were engulfed in flames. Some were killed instantly. Others survived, but with terrible burns covering large percentages of their bodies. The pharmacist's mate knows that serious burns are among the most difficult injuries to treat, even with proper facilities. On a damaged destroyer at sea, his options are painfully limited. He has tannic acid solution, which was standard treatment for burns early in the war. You swab the burned area with tannic acid, which forms a protective coating over the burn. But this treatment has fallen out of favor. It's been found to actually impede healing in many cases, and some ships have switched to petroleum jelly or simply saline solution. Either way, what he's doing is mostly keeping the burn clean and preventing infection until these men can be evacuated to a hospital ship. The burn victims are in shock. Their bodies are going into crisis, blood pressure dropping, systems shutting down. He's starting intravenous lines when he can, running plasma to stabilize them. The ship carries plasma, freeze-dried human blood plasma that can be reconstituted with sterile water, and it's a lifesaver. Without plasma, many burn victims would die from shock within hours. With plasma, they have a chance to survive until reaching better medical care. Morphine is his most important drug. He's got morphine syrettes, small tubes with needles attached, each containing a dose of morphine sulfate. He sticks these into wounded men straight through their clothing if necessary, giving them relief from unbearable pain. He marks each man's forehead with an M and the time of injection, so other medical personnel will know they've had morphine. Too much morphine can kill, so this tracking is critical. Penetrating wounds from shrapnel are everywhere. The Kamikaze's bomb has thrown metal fragments throughout the impact area. Men have pieces of steel embedded in their arms, legs, torsos, heads. Some fragments are small and superficial, painful, but not life-threatening. Others have penetrated deep, damaging internal organs, severing arteries. The pharmacist's mate is doing battlefield surgery right there on deck, probing wounds, removing fragments, tying off bleeders, suturing when he can. He has sulfur drugs, sulfanilamide powder that he sprinkles into wounds to prevent infection. This is relatively new medicine, not available in World War I, and it's saving lives. Without sulfur drugs, many of these infected wounds would turn gangrenous and kill men days or weeks after the battle. With sulfur, the infection rate drops dramatically. Some injuries are beyond anything he can handle. A man is brought to him with his abdomen torn open by a large fragment, intestines visible, bleeding internally. The pharmacist's mate knows this man needs a surgeon, an operating room, blood transfusions, specialized equipment. He has none of these. All he can do is give morphine, cover the wound as best he can, and hope the man survives until he can be evacuated. Head injuries are particularly frightening. Men with skull fractures, with fragments embedded in their brains, with traumatic injuries that affect their consciousness and behavior. Some are lucid, talking normally, not realizing how severely they're injured. Others are unconscious or delirious. The pharmacist's mate knows that many head injuries look survivable but aren't, and others look fatal. But the patient somehow pulls through. There's no good way to predict outcomes, so he treats them all and hopes for the best. Fractures are common from the blast, and from men being thrown against steel structures. Broken arms, broken legs, broken ribs. He's splinting what he can, using whatever materials are available, pieces of wood, rolled up magazines, anything rigid enough to immobilize a broken bone. Pain relief is important, but so is preventing further injury. A broken leg bone can sever an artery if it's not properly splinted. A fractured rib can puncture a lung. The psychological wounds are invisible but real. Some men are in shock. Not medical shock, but psychological shock, staring blankly, not responding to questions, unable to process what just happened. Others are hysterical, panicking, needing to be restrained or sedated. Combat stress is something the Navy is just beginning to understand, and the term shell shock from World War I is evolving into what will eventually be called post-traumatic stress disorder. But right now, on this deck, there's no time for psychology. The pharmacist's mate gives them sedatives if necessary and tries to get them to a quiet area where they can calm down. He's not working alone. His assistants, other sailors with first aid training, are helping. They're carrying men, holding them down during painful procedures, passing supplies, keeping track of who's been treated and who hasn't. The chaplain is making his rounds, offering prayers and comfort. The ship's cooks have abandoned the galley and are helping carry stretchers. Everyone who can be spared from other duties is involved in casualty treatment. The dead are everywhere too. Some died instantly in the Kamikaze impact. Others died of wounds before they could be treated. Bodies are being moved to one area, covered with canvas or blankets, tagged with whatever identification information is available. There will be time later for proper burial at sea, but right now the dead must wait while the living are treated. Evacuation is the next challenge. The seriously wounded need to get off this damaged destroyer and onto a hospital ship where they can receive proper surgical care. But you can't evacuate in the middle of a battle. You have to wait until the ship reaches the anchorage and can transfer casualties to landing craft or directly to a hospital ship alongside. The hospital ships are painted white with large red crosses, and they're floating medical facilities with operating rooms, X-ray equipment, laboratory facilities, and trained surgeons and nurses. Getting to a hospital ship within 24 hours can mean the difference between survival and death for seriously wounded men. But first you have to keep them alive during the voyage back to the anchorage, and that's the pharmacist's mate's job. He's been at it for hours now. His uniform is soaked with blood, other men's blood. He's exhausted, running on adrenaline and coffee. His supplies are running low. He's almost out of morphine. The plasma supply is depleted. He's using the last of his bandages and dressings. But he keeps working because men are still depending on him. The statistics from kamikaze attacks are grim. Burn injuries occurred in 30% of survivors from kamikaze hits. When you factor in the men who died immediately or from their wounds soon after, the overall casualty rate from a direct kamikaze strike often exceeded 50%. The difference between a ship with manageable casualties and a ship where most of the crew dies often came down to where the kamikaze hit and whether the ship had time to evacuate the wounded before sinking. The USS Morrison, hit by 4 kamikazes at Station 1, sank so quickly that many wounded men went down with the ship. The 152 men lost included wounded who couldn't get off in time. The USS Lafay, which survived, was able to evacuate her wounded to proper medical care, and most of them survived. The difference was luck. One ship sank, one didn't, but also damage control and the precious time it bought for evacuation. Navy medicine in World War II was remarkably advanced for its time. Plasma for treating shock, sulfur drugs for preventing infection, morphine for pain management, and a well-developed system of moving wounded from battle dressing stations on destroyers to hospital ships to shore-based hospitals. But on a destroyer under attack, none of that sophisticated system helps. You're relying on one pharmacist's mate, his limited supplies, and his training to keep men alive. The wounded remember the pharmacist's mate forever. When they tell their stories decades later, they talk about the young medical corpsman who treated them, on deck while fires burned nearby and the ship listed under them. They remember his calm voice, his steady hands, his determination to save them despite impossible conditions. Some of them are alive only because of him. Right now, your ship's pharmacist's mate is doing the same thing. He's treating your wounded shipmates. He's making split-second decisions about who gets morphine, who gets plasma, who gets evacuated first. And he's doing it while your ship is still in danger, while the battle might not be over, while he himself could become a casualty at any moment. This is the reality of medical care on a World War II destroyer. It's not sophisticated, it's not gentle. It's battlefield medicine practiced under the worst possible conditions, but it saves lives, and that's all that matters. Let's talk about how destroyers die, because survival depends on understanding the specific vulnerabilities that can take your ship from damaged to sinking in minutes. Not all kamikaze hits are equal. Location matters. Circumstances matter. Let's examine the ways a destroyer can be lost and what makes the difference between survival and death. The most catastrophic vulnerability is a magazine explosion. Your ship carries magazines throughout her length, compartments storing 5-inch ammunition, 40mm ammunition, 20mm ammunition, depth charges, and pyrotechnics. The largest magazines are the 5-inch magazines located below each gun mount. These compartments hold hundreds of shells and powder charges, and if they detonate, the explosion will tear your ship apart. The Navy knows this danger and takes extensive precautions. Magazines are designed with thick bulkheads and multiple safety systems. There are flooding valves that can deliberately flood a magazine if fire threatens it. The ammunition handling procedures are carefully designed to minimize the risk of accidental ignition. But when a kamikaze carrying a 500-pound bomb crashes into your ship directly above a magazine, all those precautions might not be enough.
The USS Abner Reed was lost when a kamikaze crashed aft and started a severe gasoline fire. The fire spread to the after magazines despite firefighting efforts. The magazines detonated, blowing the stern off the ship. She sank quickly with heavy casualties. The initial kamikaze hit was survivable, but the magazine explosion that followed wasn't.
Gasoline fires are your second major killer. Unlike fuel oil, which burns but doesn't explode easily, aviation gasoline creates a dual threat. When it spills, it spreads rapidly across decks and runs into lower compartments through any opening. When it burns, it creates intense heat. Gasoline fires burn at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And most dangerously, gasoline vapors mixed with air create an explosive mixture. When those vapors ignite in a confined space, you get a vapor explosion that has blast effects similar to high explosives. The USS Franklin, an aircraft carrier, nearly sank from gasoline vapor explosions after being hit by a single bomb. The bomb detonated among aircraft spotted on the hangar deck. Aviation gasoline from the plane's fuel tanks spread throughout the hangar and mixed with air. When it ignited, the vapor explosion was powerful enough to blow aircraft through the overhead and buckle the ship's structure. Franklin survived, but barely, and only because of heroic damage control work. On a destroyer, a gasoline fire from a crashed kamikaze can spread with terrifying speed. The burning fuel runs down passageways, into berthing spaces, into machinery spaces. It follows the path of least resistance, finding every crack and opening. Men fleeing from one compartment find themselves trapped when fire cuts off their escape route. The smoke from gasoline fires is thick and black, reducing visibility to zero and making it impossible to breathe without protective equipment. Progressive flooding is the third major killer. When the kamikaze's bomb blows a hole in your hull, seawater starts pouring in. If damage control teams can quickly contain that flooding to one compartment, your ship probably survives. But if the flooding spreads to adjacent compartments, either because bulkheads fail or because hatches weren't properly closed, you've got progressive flooding that can sink you. The problem is cumulative. Each flooded compartment adds weight and changes your ship's stability. As you get heavier, you sink lower in the water, and holes that were above the waterline are now submerged, admitting even more water. As your stability decreases, you develop a list to one side. The list makes it harder to fight fires and control flooding because everything is at an angle. Hoses don't drain properly. Equipment slides across decks. Men have difficulty moving through tilted passageways. The USS Pringle hit a mine that blew off her bow. The crew was fighting to control flooding when a kamikaze struck her. The combination of mine damage and kamikaze damage was too much. She flooded progressively and sank in 5 minutes. The crew barely had time to abandon ship. 78 men were lost. Loss of power and propulsion can be a death sentence. Your ship's electrical power comes from steam-driven generators in the engineering spaces. If a kamikaze knocks out those generators, you lose power throughout the ship. That means no lights, no pumps, no firefighting systems, no steering, no communication. You're blind, deaf, and helpless. Similarly, if the kamikaze damages your boilers or turbines, you lose propulsion. A destroyer that can't move is a sitting duck. You can't maneuver to avoid follow-up attacks. You can't maintain your position against wind and current. And without the engine-driven pumps, your ability to fight fires and flooding is severely compromised. Many ships survived the initial kamikaze hit, only to be sunk by follow-up attacks because they lost mobility. Structural failure is less common, but still deadly. A destroyer's hull is designed to handle the stresses of high-speed operations and rough seas, but it's not designed to handle the concentrated blast effects of a large bomb detonating inside the ship. The bomb can break frames, rupture longitudinal members, and create stress concentrations that weaken the entire structure. The USS Hambleton was torpedoed and suffered severe structural damage that reduced her effective strength to about 15% of original. She survived because the crew kept her in calm water and prevented additional flooding in critical areas. But if a ship's back is broken, if the structure is damaged to the point where the ship can't support her own weight, she'll break in two and sink quickly. The location of the hit matters enormously. A kamikaze hitting your bow or stern is bad, but usually survivable. There are fewer critical systems at the extremes of the ship. A hit amidships, near the engineering spaces or magazines, is much more dangerous. A hit on the bridge can kill your command structure and leave the ship without effective leadership. A hit that takes out your fire control systems leaves your remaining guns unable to engage targets accurately. The type of kamikaze makes a difference too. A small aircraft with minimal bomb load might cause only limited damage. A large bomber with a 1,000-pound bomb can devastate a destroyer. And the Oka rocket bomb is in a class by itself, hitting at over 600 miles per hour with a 1,200-kilogram warhead. It can punch completely through a destroyer and detonate below the waterline. The USS Manat El Arbela never had a chance when the Oka hit her. Weather and sea state affect your chances. Fighting fires and flooding in calm seas is difficult enough. In heavy weather, it's nearly impossible. Waves washing over the deck can push burning gasoline into new areas. Rolling and pitching makes it hard to move around the ship, hard to aim hoses, hard to position shoring beams. Some ships that might have survived in calm conditions were lost because they were caught in bad weather when hit. The sequence of events matters. A single kamikaze hit followed by immediate, effective damage control can be survivable. Multiple hits in quick succession can overwhelm your damage control capabilities. The USS Morrison took 4 kamikaze hits within about 10 minutes. Each hit created new fires and new flooding, and there simply weren't enough damage control parties to handle everything at once. She sank with heavy casualties. The training and experience of your crew is critical. Veterans who've been through combat before react faster and more effectively than green crews. Ships that have recently undergone intensive damage control training perform better than ships that haven't. Individual initiative matters. Sailors who don't wait for orders, but immediately start fighting fires and controlling flooding, often make the difference. The attitude of the crew affects survival too. Ships where the crew believes they can save her usually do. Ships where panic sets in and men abandon their posts often don't. The commanding officer sets the tone. Commander Becton's refusal to consider abandoning the Laffey inspired his crew to fight harder to save her. Other captains in similar situations gave up too early, and their ships were lost. What ultimately determines whether your ship sinks or survives is the cumulative effect of multiple factors. Can you control the fires before they reach a magazine? Can you contain the flooding before it progresses too far? Can you maintain enough power to run pumps and lights? Can you keep your crew organized and fighting? If the answer to most of these questions is yes, you'll probably survive. If too many answers are no, you're going down. The statistics bear this out. Of the destroyers hit by kamikazes, roughly 13% sank. That means about 7 out of 8 damaged destroyers survived. Those are actually pretty good odds considering the violence of the attacks. But for the individual ships that sank, the statistics were meaningless. Their crews faced survival rates that were much lower, with casualty rates often exceeding 50%. Your best protection against these vulnerabilities is preparation. Keep watertight doors closed at general quarters. Maintain damage control readiness. Know where every pump and every hose is located. Train constantly. Practice firefighting in darkness and smoke. Drill flooding control procedures until they're automatic. Build a crew that won't quit even when things look hopeless, because when the kamikaze hits, you're going to need every advantage you can get. The ship's survival depends on whether your vulnerabilities are exploited or whether your damage control is good enough to overcome them. There's no middle ground. Either you stay afloat or you sink. Either most of your crew survives or most of them die. Those are the stakes, and those are the realities of trying to survive a kamikaze attack on a World War II destroyer. You need to understand something that the official action reports don't capture: the mental and emotional toll of facing kamikaze attacks. This isn't just about technical systems and damage control procedures. This is about human beings pushed to the absolute limits of what they can endure. Fear is your constant companion on the radar picket line. Not the momentary fear of a sudden alarm, but grinding, persistent fear that never really goes away. You know that kamikazes are coming. You know that ships on your station have been hit before. You know the statistics. Every time the radar picks up bogies, your heart rate spikes. Every time General Quarters sounds, you wonder if this is the attack that gets through. The fear isn't cowardice. It's rational assessment of danger. You'd have to be insane not to be afraid when facing suicide aircraft deliberately trying to crash into your ship. The question isn't whether you feel fear, but how you handle it. Do you let it paralyze you, or do you channel it into heightened alertness and faster reactions? Sleep deprivation compounds everything. You're standing watches, working during the day, responding to frequent General Quarters alarms. 4 hours of sleep per day is typical, and even that's interrupted. When you finally get into your bunk, your mind won't shut off. You're replaying the day's close calls, worrying about tomorrow's dangers, thinking about home and wondering if you'll ever see it again. Exhaustion makes you slower, dulls your reflexes, impairs your judgment. In training, you could perform your duties smoothly and efficiently. After weeks on the picket line with minimal sleep, you're fumbling, making mistakes, struggling to concentrate. And this is exactly when you need to be at your sharpest, because the kamikaze attack can come at any moment. The isolation of radar picket duty is psychologically crushing. You're out there alone or with one other destroyer, far from the main fleet, the most exposed position in the entire Navy. You can see the carriers and battleships on the horizon, safely surrounded by dozens of escort ships, and you're thinking, why am I out here? Why is my ship the one that has to take the hits? The answer, that your early warning saves those other ships, is intellectually satisfying, but emotionally insufficient. You understand the mission, you accept it, but that doesn't make it easier to bear when you're the one standing in harm's way day after day while others are in relative safety. Watching other ships get hit affects you deeply. You see the Morrison take 4 kamikazes and sink. You see the Laffey burning from end to end, listing heavily, and you're sure she's going down. You see ships limping back to the anchorage, their superstructures wrecked, casualties being transferred to hospital ships. These aren't abstract events. These are your fellow destroyermen, ships you've served alongside, men you've drunk with and worked with. Their fate could be yours tomorrow. Survivor guilt is real. When a ship on your station is sunk and you weren't hit, you feel relief mixed with guilt. Why them and not us? You know it's just luck, just the random chance of which ship the kamikazes chose to attack, but you can't help feeling like you should have done something, should have helped somehow, even though there was nothing you could have done. The fatalism that develops among picket crews is partly protective mechanism, partly resignation. Some men convince themselves they're not going to make it home, so they stop worrying about it. Others develop superstitions, lucky coins, ritual behaviors before going to General Quarters, prayers to particular saints. Anything that gives the illusion of control over a situation where you have almost none. But there's also defiance. The destroyer crews develop a "they can sink this ship, but they can't make me quit" attitude. When Commander Beckton told his crew that they'd never abandon ship as long as a gun would fire, he was expressing the determination that many destroyer sailors felt. You might die, but you'll die fighting, not running away. The camaraderie is the thing that keeps you sane. You're not going through this alone. Every man on your ship is facing the same dangers, the same fears, the same exhaustion. You watch out for each other. When someone is struggling, shipmates help them through it. When someone breaks down, you don't judge them. You've all been close to breaking at some point. The conversations during lulls between attacks reveal the range of coping mechanisms. Some men talk constantly, telling stories, making jokes, anything to avoid silence and their own thoughts. Others go quiet, withdrawing into themselves, conserving emotional energy. Some write letters home even though they can't mail them yet, pouring their fears and hopes onto paper. Some pray. Some play cards or read. Everyone finds something to focus on besides the next attack. Religious faith becomes important to many men who weren't particularly religious before. Facing death concentrates the mind wonderfully, as someone once said, and when you're staring at a radar screen full of incoming aircraft, prayer suddenly seems very reasonable. The ship's chaplain is busy conducting services, hearing confessions, offering comfort. Even men who don't believe in God sometimes find themselves praying during attacks. The psychological impact of seeing kamikazes up close is traumatic. When you see the pilot's face through the windscreen as he dives at your ship, when you realize he's deliberately trying to kill you, it affects you in ways that conventional combat doesn't. This isn't impersonal fire from over the horizon. This is a human being choosing to die in order to take you with him. The intimacy of it is disturbing. After the attack, assuming you survive, the reaction varies. Some men are euphoric. We made it. We're alive. We beat them. Others go into delayed shock, shaking, unable to speak. Some vomit from the adrenaline crash. Some cry. All of these reactions are normal, but the Navy of 1945 doesn't have good psychological support systems. You're expected to pull yourself together and get back to work. The wounded face their own psychological battles. Men with severe burns, facing months of painful treatment and permanent scarring, deal with trauma and depression. Men who lost limbs have to reimagine their entire futures. Men with head injuries might have personality changes or cognitive impairments. The physical wounds heal faster than the psychological ones. Post-traumatic stress, though it's not called that yet, affects many kamikaze attack survivors. Nightmares are common, startling at sudden noises, difficulty concentrating, depression, anxiety, survivor guilt when thinking about shipmates who didn't make it. In 1945, the Navy doesn't understand PTSD well, and many men suffer in silence rather than admit they're struggling. The destroyer crews develop dark humor as a coping mechanism. They call themselves tin can sailors, with pride mixed with irony. They joke about being on Destroyer Demobilization Plan Number 5. They name drinks after weapons that don't work properly. The humor is defensive, a way of acknowledging the danger without being consumed by it. Leadership matters enormously for crew morale. A captain who inspires confidence, who communicates clearly, who shows genuine concern for his men, can hold a crew together through anything. A captain who seems uncertain or panicky can cause a crew to fall apart even under lighter attacks. The crew watches their commanding officer constantly, taking their cues from him. If he's calm and determined, they'll be calm and determined. If he's scared, they'll be terrified. The moment when you're actually under attack, when kamikazes are diving at your ship and you're at your battle station, the psychology changes. The fear doesn't go away, but it's pushed aside by focus and training. You're too busy doing your job to think about dying. The gun crews are loading and firing. The damage control parties are standing by. The lookouts are tracking aircraft. Everyone is functioning on adrenaline and muscle memory. It's after the attack, during the quiet moments, that the psychological effects hit hardest. You replay what happened, thinking about how close you came to dying. You think about shipmates who were killed or wounded. You wonder how much more you can take, how many more attacks you can survive before your luck runs out. The cumulative stress is the real killer. One kamikaze attack is terrifying but manageable. 10 attacks over several weeks wears you down. 20 attacks break some men. Everyone has a breaking point, and the crew rotation system tries to cycle ships off the picket line before too many men reach that point. But with the tempo of operations at Okinawa, there often isn't time for adequate rest. Commodore Moosebrugger's comment about morale is telling. After a certain point, he said, "The best efforts to boost morale are futile. The boys know what they're in for, and you can't fool them." This is the voice of a commander who understands the psychological realities. You can't spin radar picket duty into something positive. All you can do is acknowledge the danger, rotate crews as much as possible, and trust in their sense of duty and their bonds with shipmates. The psychological resilience of the destroyer crews at Okinawa is remarkable. They kept going back out to the picket stations even after watching other ships get destroyed. They maintained their vigilance even when exhausted. They fought to save their ships even when the situation seemed hopeless. This wasn't mindless obedience. It was conscious choice to do their duty despite fear, exhaustion, and trauma. Understanding the psychological dimension helps explain why some ships survived and others didn't. The ships that kept fighting when all seemed lost, where damage control parties didn't give up, where gun crews kept shooting even when their ship was burning and listing, those ships had crews that were mentally resilient enough to push through the trauma and the fear. Your psychological state right now, as you watch those bogies close on your position, is part of your survival equation. If you panic, you're more likely to make mistakes. If you freeze, you're not contributing to your ship's defense. If you give up mentally before the attack even hits, you've already lost. But if you can keep your fear under control, stay focused on your duties, trust your training and your shipmates, then you maximize your chances of survival. The psychological battle is as real as the physical battle. It's just less visible and harder to measure. But it's there, affecting every decision, every action, every outcome. The ships that survived kamikaze attacks had crews that won both battles, the one against the aircraft and the one against their own fear and desperation. Let's talk about numbers and probabilities, because you need to understand what factors actually affect your chances of surviving a kamikaze attack. Not superstition, not hope, but the measurable variables that determine outcomes. Start with the base statistics. Of the 944 kamikaze attacks documented during the war, 296 hit Allied ships. That's a hit rate of 31%. But this number is deceptive because it includes all attacks on all ship types. For destroyers on radar picket duty, the hit rate was considerably higher because you're isolated and relatively lightly defended. Of the 303 destroyers attacked by kamikazes, 92 were hit, a hit rate of about 30%. Of those 92 hits, 12 destroyers sank, roughly 13% of ships that took hits. These numbers tell you that if a kamikaze attacks your ship specifically, you have about a 1 in 3 chance of being hit. If you're hit, you have about a 1 in 8 chance of sinking. Those odds might sound survivable until you consider the casualties. Even ships that survived often lost a third or more of their crews. The USS Laffey survived, but lost 32 dead and 71 wounded. Out of 336 men, almost a third of the crew were casualties. The USS Callahan, which sank, lost 47 men, but had 73 wounded who were rescued, still nearly 40% casualties. The location of the hit is the single most important variable. Kamikazes that hit the bow or stern area typically cause less damage than hits amidships. A study of destroyer casualties showed that hits aft of the forward stack and forward of the aft stack, the midships area where engineering and magazines are concentrated, were much more likely to result in sinking than hits at the extremities. The USS Drexler was hit by 2 kamikazes in quick succession, both striking amidships. She sank in less than a minute, so fast that many men went down with the ship. The USS Hugh W. Hadley was hit by a kamikaze that struck the bow, severe damage, but the ship survived. Location mattered. The size and type of the attacking aircraft affects outcomes. Small fighters with minimal bomb loads cause less damage than large bombers. The Imperial Japanese Navy's D-4Y Judy dive bomber was particularly effective as a kamikaze because it could carry a large bomb and had good diving characteristics. The obsolete aircraft pressed into kamikaze service late in the war were less effective simply because they carried smaller bombs or had less reliable delivery characteristics. The Oka rocket bombs were in a category by themselves. Only one was launched successfully against a ship during the war, the USS Manat El Abel. That ship sank in 3 minutes. If Okas had been more widely deployed, destroyer losses would have been catastrophically higher. Your survival chance against an Oka is effectively zero. There's no defense once it's launched and accelerating toward you at over 600 miles per hour. The number of hits you take obviously affects survival. Most destroyers that sank took multiple kamikaze hits. Single hits were usually survivable if damage control was effective. The USS Hazelwood took a single kamikaze hit off the Philippines and survived with moderate damage. The USS Morrison took 4 hits at Station 1 and sank. The correlation is clear, but not absolute. Some ships sank from single hits if they struck critical areas, and some ships survived multiple hits through excellent damage control. The timing between hits matters too. Multiple hits in quick succession overwhelm your damage control capabilities. The repair parties are still fighting the first fire when the second kamikaze hits and starts another fire in a different location. The pumps are working on flooding from the first hit when the second hit creates new flooding. You simply don't have enough people and equipment to handle everything simultaneously. The USS Little took 4 kamikaze hits in rapid succession, all within about 15 minutes. Each hit added to the damage, and there was no time for damage control teams to get ahead of any single problem. She sank quickly. Contrast this with the Laffy, which took hits over 80 minutes. Between attacks, damage control teams could make progress on fires and flooding. The longer time period, paradoxically, improved survival chances despite more total hits. Combat air patrol support dramatically affects your chances. When you have adequate KIAP cover, the fighters intercept and shoot down many kamikazes before they reach you. Studies showed that effective KP could reduce the number of kamikazes reaching their targets by 50 to 70%. But KAP effectiveness varied wildly. Sometimes you had excellent fighter support. Sometimes the fighters were outnumbered or caught out of position. Sometimes they simply weren't available because carriers were under attack themselves. The USS Aaron Ward had poor KAP support during her attack. Fighters were tied up elsewhere, and kamikazes attacked in overwhelming numbers. She survived, but was so heavily damaged she was declared a constructive total loss. Better KAP support might have prevented several of those hits. Weather affects outcomes in complex ways. Poor visibility can make it harder for kamikazes to find you, but it also makes it harder for your lookouts to spot them and for your guns to track them. Heavy seas make damage control more difficult. Light winds mean smoke from fires doesn't blow clear, obscuring visibility and creating breathing hazards. There's no simple good weather or bad weather calculus. It depends on specific conditions. The training level of your crew is measurable. Ships that had recently completed intensive damage control training had better survival rates than ships with less recent training. Veteran crews who'd been in combat before reacted faster and more effectively than green crews facing their first action. The Navy knew this and tried to mix experienced sailors with new recruits, but the rapid expansion of the fleet meant many ships deployed with largely inexperienced crews. The experience and leadership of your commanding officer matters. Captains who could maneuver their ships effectively, who could make quick decisions under pressure, who could inspire their crews to keep fighting, had higher survival rates. Commander Beckton of the Laffy is the obvious example, But there were many other skilled captains whose leadership saved their ships. The material condition of your ship affects survival. Ships fresh from overhaul, with all systems working properly, had advantages over ships that had been at sea for months with deferred maintenance. Your pumps work better when they're properly maintained. Your firefighting equipment is more reliable when it's not corroded. Your watertight doors seal properly when the gaskets are in good condition. Luck, pure random chance, plays a larger role than anyone wants to admit. The kamikaze that hits your magazine versus the one that hits your empty forward storage space. The bomb that detonates versus the one that's a dud. The shell fragment that misses your head by inches versus the one that doesn't. You can maximize your chances through training and preparation, but you can't eliminate the role of chance. The most important survival factor is damage control effectiveness. This encompasses training, leadership, equipment, and determination. Ships where damage control parties responded immediately, where flooding was contained quickly, where fires were extinguished before they spread to magazines, those ships survived. Ships where damage control broke down, where parties were overwhelmed or gave up, where critical flooding wasn't contained, those ships sank. Personal survival. If your ship goes down depends on several factors. Can you get off the ship before she sinks? Many men died because they were trapped below decks or couldn't reach the weather decks in time. Are you wearing a life jacket? It's amazing how many sailors at general quarters didn't have their life jackets properly secured. Can you swim? Not all sailors in 1945 could swim well, and those who couldn't had lower survival rates in the water. Water temperature matters for survivors. Off Okinawa in April, the water temperature is around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to cause hypothermia with extended exposure, but not immediately life-threatening. You can survive in that water for hours if you're not injured. In colder waters, survival time drops dramatically. Rescue prospects affect survival rates. In the anchorage or near other ships, rescue usually comes quickly. Men in the water might be picked up within minutes or hours. Out on the radar picket line, especially if your escort ships are also damaged or fighting off attacks, rescue can take much longer. Some men spent a full day in the water before being rescued. The presence of sharks adds to the terror, though actual shark attacks were relatively rare. The real dangers in the water are exposure, drowning if you're injured, and being hit by debris from your sinking ship. Men have been killed by falling wreckage or sucked down by the ship as she sank. Your individual position on the ship affects your survival chances. Men topside at gun mounts have a higher immediate casualty rate during attacks. They're exposed to blast, fragments, and fire, but they also have easier egress if the ship sinks. Men below decks are more protected during the attack, but more likely to become trapped if the ship goes down. There's no safe place on a destroyer under kamikaze attack, only different risks. Your job specialty correlates with survival. Gunners had high casualty rates because they were exposed during attacks. Engineers had high casualty rates because they were deep in the ship in spaces that could be damaged or flooded. Radio operators and radarmen, working in compartments protected by the superstructure, had somewhat lower casualty rates. But these are generalizations. Individual outcomes varied enormously. If we put all these factors together, what are your actual odds? If your destroyer is assigned to radar picket duty at Okinawa for an extended period, your ship has roughly a 30 to 40% chance of being hit by at least one kamikaze. If you're hit, you have about an 85% chance that your ship survives, but you personally have maybe a 60 to 70% chance of avoiding death or serious injury. Those numbers are crude estimates, and they vary based on all the factors we've discussed, but they give you a framework for understanding the risks. This isn't a suicide mission, despite what it sometimes feels like. Most ships survive, most sailors survive, but enough don't survive that every man on every picket destroyer knows he might be the one who doesn't make it. The best way to improve your odds is simple. Train hard, stay alert, trust your shipmates, follow damage control procedures, and don't give up when things look hopeless. Ships survived because crews kept fighting when survival seemed impossible. Sailors lived because they kept their heads and made good decisions under pressure. Preparation and determination won't guarantee survival, but they dramatically improve your chances. And right now, with kamikazes inbound, those chances are being tested. The mathematics of survival are about to become very personal, very real, and very immediate. The kamikaze attack has ended. Your ship is still afloat, though damaged. Fires are mostly under control. Flooding has been contained. You have casualties, killed and wounded, but most of your crew survived. You're limping back toward the anchorage at reduced speed, your combat air patrol circling overhead, other ships moving to assist if needed. You did it. You survived a kamikaze attack while serving on a World War II destroyer, but the cost of survival is written in the faces of your shipmates. The gun captain who lost 3 men from his crew, the pharmacist's mate still treating burn victims, the damage controlman whose repair party saved the ship but couldn't save 2 men, trapped in a flooded compartment, the lookout who watched a kamikaze dive straight at him and somehow missed by feet. Everyone is exhausted, traumatized, relieved, and grieving simultaneously. The ships that didn't survive are listed in the action reports with clinical precision. USS Little, sunk by 4 kamikazes, 152 men lost. USS Morrison, sunk by 4 kamikazes, 152 men lost. USS Pringle, sunk by mine and kamikaze, 78 men lost. USS Manat L. A. Bell, sunk by kamikaze and Oka rocket bomb, 79 men lost. The list goes on. 10 destroyers sunk on radar picket duty, hundreds of sailors dead, more hundreds wounded. These weren't abstract statistics when it happened. These were ships with crews, with men who had families and plans and futures. Each name on the casualty list represents someone who didn't make it home, someone who died doing a job that most Americans never heard about because destroyers on radar picket duty were overshadowed by the larger story of the Okinawa campaign. The destroyermen knew what they were doing. They weren't naive or ignorant of the dangers. They understood that radar picket duty was the most hazardous assignment in the Navy. They went anyway because that's what duty required. They stayed at their stations when kamikazes attacked. They fought fires and flooding when their ships were hit. They kept shooting when aircraft were diving at them, and many of them died doing exactly that. The survivors carried the weight of this experience for the rest of their lives. Decades later, old men who served on picket destroyers would remember those 80 days off Okinawa with crystal clarity. They'd remember the radar screen filling with bogies. They'd remember the sound of kamikazes diving. They'd remember the heat of the fires and the screams of the wounded. They'd remember shipmates who didn't make it. And they'd remember the fierce pride of belonging to a crew that refused to quit. The Navy learned valuable lessons from the kamikaze experience. Future ship designs incorporated better fire protection and improved damage control systems. Anti-aircraft defenses evolved to handle high-speed diving attacks more effectively. Tactics changed to provide better support for picket ships. But none of these improvements helped the men who fought off Okinawa in April and May of 1945. They fought with the ships they had, the weapons they had, the training they had, and they won. Not individually, some ships were lost, some men were killed, but collectively, the radar picket destroyers accomplished their mission. They provided early warning. They vectored fighters to intercept raids. They absorbed attacks that would otherwise have hit the amphibious force or the carriers. The cost was high, but the mission succeeded. Could you survive a kamikaze attack while serving on a World War II destroyer? The answer depends on luck, training, leadership, damage control, and determination. Most sailors did survive. Their ships took hits and kept fighting. Damage control teams saved vessels that should have sunk. Crews stayed together and brought damaged ships home. The survival rate wasn't 100%. It couldn't be given the violence of the attacks, but it was high enough that going on radar picket duty wasn't a death sentence. It was a dangerous job with real risks, but it was survivable with skill and fortune. The men who served on picket destroyers deserve to be remembered. Their story is part of the larger story of World War II in the Pacific, but it's a story that often gets overlooked. They weren't flying glamorous fighters or commanding battleships. They were serving on small ships, facing terrifying attacks, doing a job that had to be done. They were ordinary young men, many still teenagers, who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances and rose to meet them. So if you found this deep dive into the Kamikaze experience valuable, if you learned something about what these sailors faced and how they survived, take a moment to hit that like button. Subscribe to Whispering Wars if you want more detailed explorations of World War II history, and share this with someone who might appreciate learning about this often overlooked aspect of the Pacific War. The destroyer men of Okinawa earned their place in history through courage and sacrifice. Their story deserves to be told and remembered, and maybe, just maybe, understanding what they faced helps us appreciate the price of the freedoms we enjoy today.